Han Li examined the woman before him and coldly refused her. "I don't take disciples. And why do you think that I'd accept a Foundation establishment cultivator? As for your rash actions, I will overlook them on behalf of our past relations. You're on your own." "Senior, When Mu Paling heard him, her face revealed a trace of panic and she rushed to say something else. However, Han Li brushed aside his sleeve and summoned a gale, swaying and interrupting the woman. By the time she regained her bearings, Han Li was nowhere to be found. Having seen this, the woman became dispirited and blankly stood in place for a long while. After all, this newly appeared senior Han was the only choice she had left. At that moment, Han Li was already back inside his old cave residence. He went straight towards his insect room and withdrew the 10,000 gold-devouring beetles. In the past 20 years, his pure gold-devouring beetles had evolved once more, nearly shedding all the silver on their shells for gold. Only a few specks of silver still remained on their shells. If he didn't closely examine them, they would appear completely gold. It was clear that complete maturity for the gold-devouring beetles was only a step away. This simultaneously caused Han Li to be excited and somewhat disappointed. The ferocity of these mostly pure gold-devouring beetles had greatly broadened Han Li's perspective. He pitted over 100 black-tainted and newly evolved gold-devouring beetles against each other. As a result of a few seconds, the black-tainted beetles had nearly been wiped out. Be it might or tenacity, the newly evolved beetles were far superior to that of the black-tainted beetles. Additionally, the newly evolved beetles start to emit an ominous, repulsive scent, and their bloodthirst and gluttony had reached a level that was incomparable to before. He was convinced that if they weren't under the effects of soul control restrictions, they would devour him without any hesitation. Han Li also faintly felt as if his control over them had weakened. If they were to evolve once more, common restrictions would be impotent in the face of their savage nature. Despite these thoughts, Han Li isolated a group of his largest gold-devouring beetles and attempted to have them evolve as quickly as possible, so that he could witness the savagery and cruelty of fully mature gold-devouring beetles. However, advancing to the next stage took far longer than he anticipated. He feared that without another 100 years, it would be impossible to have them evolve to the last stage. Still, this was acceptable. It gave him time to find a better method to control these beetles. Having withdrew his beetles, Han Li walked into the medicinal garden as he continued to ponder. He then carefully put away the Ninecurl spirit ginseng and the nearly grown spirit well tree. Although the Ninecurl spirit ginseng had been greatly weakened from its use in the medicine pill, Han Li could easily restore it with the green liquid, and so he kept it in his possession. As for the spirit well tree, he had matured it over the span of many years. The day it would start to produce wine nectar wasn't far off. Han Li was looking forward to the abilities he would be granted from cleansing his eyes with large quantities of brightsite water. Apart from the insects and plants in his medicine garden, Han Li had an assortment of other items, but he felt disinterested in collecting them and just left them there. When Han Li glanced down at the medicine garden from up in the sky, he unintentionally found Mu Paling down below. She was gritting her teeth with an expression of helplessness and hadn't noticed Han Li stealthily flying up above. Han Li lightly shook his head. While handling her issues would be but a trivial effort, he was unwilling to exercise his influence as he had just recently become a chief elder of the Drifting Cloud sect, not to mention that both the Mu clan and Yang clan were large cultivation clans in the state of Zai. As for his relationship with the woman, it wasn't anything special. It wasn't reason enough to act. In fact, he'd refuse any request from the Drifting Cloud sect disciples that had recognized him from before. Han Li truly had no interest in forcefully meddling with the inner affairs of clans. As such, Han Li silently flew across the Drifting Cloud sect and arrived in front of his new cave residence. The barrier of mist departed as soon as Han Li appeared, and he directly flew into the center of the mountain. After Han Li placed the insects and plants inside his residence with great familiarity, he placed the matters of the residence into Silvermoon's hands for the time being. He then entered a silent room without hesitation and started to consolidate his nascent soul. During this time, the silver-haired old man and cultivator Lu both knew that Han Li needed this time to advance in the first step of stabilizing his nascent soul. As such, they didn't bother Han Li's cultivation. A few months later, Han Li was able to smoothly consolidate his nascent soul and merge his mind and nascent soul as one. If he were to have his nascent soul manifest out of his head now, Han Li would be able to easily control its actions. By the time Han Li left the silent room, Silvermoon had taken the form of a young woman and was respectfully waiting outside the room. However, when she looked at Han Li, her face wore a strange expression. Han Li frowned and asked, "It appears that you have something to say to me. What is it?" Silvermoon smiled with pursed lips and said, "Master, half a month after you entered the silent room, Martial niece Mew came here and had already sat on top of one of the smaller mountains. She's been waiting there for many days already." Han Li raised his brow and expressionlessly said, "This woman actually has no sense of propriety. If she wants to wait so much, then let her wait. I'm not one to look for trouble." But master, not long after this woman arrived, I received sound transmission talismans from the Yan clan and the Mew clan. Because master was in seclusion, I've made a duplicate of each of these sound transmission talismans. Silvermoon turned her gaze and probingly asked, "Would master like to take a look?" Han Li stroked his chin and indifferently said, "Sound transmission talismans, from the Mew and Yan clan. Could it have something with that woman named Paling? Is there a problem from what you heard?" Silvermoon sweetly smiled, "He. Master has quite the foresight, but there is no need for me to say anything. Master will know as soon as he hears them. There is truly a bit of a problem." "Take them out." Han Li was disinterested in guessing the meaning behind her words, and he extended his hand. Silvermoon took out a white and a red talisman and handed them over to Han Li with a smile still on her face. Han Li bluntly grabbed them and had them light up into a ball of flame. Han Li calmly listened to what the balls of light had to say. A short moment later, he wore a face of amazement, soon to be replaced with fury. Once Han Li finished listening to them, his expression sank and he icily said, "Humph, this woman is truly too brave. Does she believe that I will allow her to act so troublesomely because she was my martial aunt for a few years?" Silvermoon attempted to stifle her smile. She clearly understood that this would offend Master. However, it seems this woman believes that Master isn't a hard-hearted man despite the little contact she had with you. Otherwise, she wouldn't have had the courage to dare to seek protection from you during that day. Besides, even if you punish her, she probably believes it to be a better alternative than becoming the Tao companion of that senior martial brother Yan. Han Li glanced at Silvermoon with an annoyed glint in his eye and said, "However, she is far too daring to actually directly tell both clans that I've taken her in as a concubine. Both clan heads have hastily sent sound transmissions expressing their regret. The Yan clan head even renounced the marriage, wishing for me to not take any offense for their ignorance. Since this woman dared to act this way, it seems she should be prepared." Silvermoon blinked with bright eyes and revealed slight amazement. "Master means to." Han Li stretched himself and lazily said, "What? Is there anything strange in me accepting a concubine now that I've formed a nascent soul? Since this woman is a peerless beauty, I may as well make this fiction a reality and have a taste of what it means to pair cultivate." However, there was a trace of a sneer on his face. After a moment of confusion, Silvermoon pursed her lips and doubtfully said, "However, Master was never someone to be with a woman, and he had even refused a few advances. Lady Wen, for example, and earlier there was." Han Li narrowed his eyes and spoke with a flat voice. "The past was the past. The present is now. My cultivation was far too shallow before I formed a nascent soul, and I had no thoughts of seeking the pleasure of a concubine. But if Wen Siyu were to meet me now, I naturally wouldn't let her go." When Silvermoon heard Han Li's words, she was dumbfounded. It felt as if he were speaking sincerely. Silvermoon widely opened her eyes and she hesitantly said, "Master, you're serious. You'll come to know whether or not my words hold true. For now, call that woman in for me. At her current cultivation, she shouldn't be able to see through your human form," Han Li casually commanded. Regardless of her suspicions, she respectfully replied, "As you bid, master." Han Li then turned around and entered the large hall. After the time it took to finish a cup of tea, Silvermoon gracefully entered the hall with a haggard Mew Paling. It seemed that this short time had been quite stressful for her. Silvermoon glanced at Han Li and respectfully said, "Master, young Lady Mew has arrived." Han Li nodded his head and indifferently said, "I'm aware. You may leave." "This servant is excused." Silvermoon shot a glance at Mew Paling and departed from hall with a pursed smile. "I pay my respects to Senior Han." After saluting Han Li, she remained helplessly silent as if she were awaiting punishment from Han Li. Han Li slightly frowned in response to her appearance, and he examined her beautiful face. Without revealing the slightest anger, he calmly said, "You should know why I've called you in. You blurted out words to those cultivation clans that gave them a domineering impression of me. After all, Seizing an engaged woman as a concubine can't be something that is easily taken. Of course, at my current cultivation, the Mu and Yang clan wouldn't dare to complain, nor do I hold them in much esteem. However, this doesn't mean that I will tolerate your presumptuous actions. You should realize I will punish you. The woman raised her head and spoke with a pale complexion. Please forgive me, Senior. This woman has truly been reckless, but rather than wed into the Yang clan, Junior would find it preferable to become Senior's concubine. And Lee's gaze flickered and he snorted before slowly continuing. Since you said that you were to be my concubine, I can no longer stay uninvolved, nor can I make clear that this is untrue. Otherwise, these cultivation clans will recognize me, this new drifting cloud sect elder, to be weak and feeble, incapable of protecting even a foundation establishment woman underneath him. And these rumors should have already spread throughout the cultivation world as well. So tell me, how should I deal with you? Yu Paling bit her lips and softly said, Junior has nothing to say. I will have no complaints in how Senior will punish me. Since cultivators on the outside know you to be my concubine, I will give you two choices. The first is to pretend to be my concubine, but you will actually be my servant and obey my orders. After you've served me for 20 years, the matter should have faded and I will let you free. However, you had best avoid any thoughts that I will assist with the cultivation of a servant girl. When Mu Paling heard this, she revealed a trace of disappointment and raised her head, asking, Then, what is the second choice? And Lee stared at the woman and calmly said, The second option is make this fiction a reality, to become my concubine in truth. You will attend to me through your life. I will not treat my own spouse pettily and will guide you in your cultivation if my mood is willing. However, I must first tell you that if you wish to become my concubine, I will place a sole restriction on you to prevent any possible betrayal. After all, if you were to suddenly change your mind, my secrets could possibly be laid bare. Mu Paling grew distracted upon hearing him, and her expression fluttered, as if she were deeply considering Han Li's thoughts. It seems this woman didn't greatly oppose the thought of marrying Han Li. Han Li indifferently said, I know that you've always been proud. Even a nascent soul cultivator such as myself isn't your ideal husband. However, this doesn't matter. Fellow Taoist Mu isn't my ideal Tao companion either, but this won't stop me from taking you in as a concubine. If you obtain my protection, you will tread farther on the path of cultivation without much cost. And in these past few years, you've come to know that I'm not a brutal or craven eccentric. Even if I place down a restriction on your soul, I won't mistreat you or cause you hardship. And later on, I may even grow to trust you and remove those restrictions. It either will be this, or acting as my servant for 20 years. Those years as a servant shouldn't pass by too slowly. His eyes moved away from her as if he didn't mind what she chose. Mu Paling's heart grew turbulent. While she was unwilling to be controlled by another, the assistance and guidance of a nascent soul cultivator was also hard to pass. Unable to come to a decision, she hesitantly said, Senior, could I have 2 days to consider this? As for becoming Han Li's concubine, she already knew what Han Li had described. It couldn't be said to be a bad decision in the slightest. Countless beautiful, young foundation establishment women would be tempted to take the offer of becoming the concubine of a nascent soul cultivator. Without any intention of making it difficult for her, Han Li leniently nodded his head. You may. Come back after 2 days with your answer. It should be enough time for you to come to a decision. He then called for Silvermoon to take her out. After saluting, Mu Paling followed Silvermoon's lead and absent-mindedly left the hall. A short moment later, Silvermoon gracefully walked back inside. Silvermoon's bright eyes flickered and she mysteriously smiled. Master, the 2 conditions you raised are somewhat. Han Li glanced at Silvermoon and said, What? Do you think they're too harsh? Don't they align with her wishes? Silvermoon sighed and softly said, It isn't about harshness. It's merely that this woman possesses an unyielding heart. With her pride, it would be difficult for her to choose either option. But if Master truly accepts this girl, then a soul restriction is undoubtedly necessary considering his many secrets. Han Li attentively took measure of Silvermoon and spoke with slight surprise. You seem to have quite a favorable impression of her. Silvermoon was momentarily surprised before Riley smiling. That isn't it. It's just that her staunch character gives me a familiar feeling. It seemed in the past that I had a close relationship to someone with a similar nature. I've unconsciously grown concerned with her. Han Li nodded his head and didn't pursue the matter any further. Silvermoon tactfully avoided mentioning Mu Paling and instead discussed the matter of refining the celestial ice flames, Han Li's most pressing matter. 2 days later, Mu Paling arrived once more, and she was led into the main hall by Silvermoon. Han Li glanced at the woman and bluntly asked, "So, you should have already came to a decision. Will you be my servant for 20 years, or will I be placing a sole restriction on you?" It was clear the woman had made up her mind. She took a quick breath and calmly said, "I've already decided. In the cultivation world, it could be considered destiny for a low-grade female cultivator to be given an opportunity to become the concubine of a nascent soul cultivator. However, I hope Senior will make a promise before I become his concubine. So long as this condition is met, I am willing to be restricted by your spiritual sense and spend the rest of my life under you." "A condition? Go ahead and speak." Han Li's face remained unchanged, as if he had already anticipated this. "I know Senior Han isn't a hasty character. As such, I hope that Senior will pledge to hold off for 30 years before he takes my vital yin. I am currently at a crucial point in my cultivation and wish to see whether or not I can form a core within 30 years. It is extremely important for my cultivation art that I remain a virgin. It was for this reason that I was unwilling to be married. Regardless of whether or not I form my core within this time, Senior may pair cultivate with me once time has passed." Perhaps thinking that the conditions were too harsh, or that speaking of the matter of pair cultivation was embarrassing, her face blushed after this was all said, revealing a captivating expression. 30 years, haha, that's fine, I can agree to your condition." Once Han Li heard this, his eyes brightly flickered and he instantly agreed. Mu Paling was amazed that Han Li had so quickly agreed, but she soon recovered and joyfully said, "Many thanks to Senior." After pondering for a moment, Han Li said, "In 2 days, I will officially notify the other 2 elders of the sect that I've taken you in as a concubine. But since it will be 30 years before we actually pair cultivate, I will open a smaller separate cave residence for your cultivation among one of the other 3 mountains. Of course, if I have the time, I will go over and give you some guidance." "Yes, as you wish." Mu Paling was clearly very satisfied with these results and approved without thought. Han Li's expression relaxed and he mysteriously smiled. "As my future concubine, there is no need to always address me as Senior. You may simply address me as Lord. I'm only 200 years old, and am quite young considering my lifespan is now over 1,000 years." Han Li then sized up the beautiful woman without any restraint, clearly appreciating the view. The Lord that Han Li mentions is actually young Lord Chinese letter. Mu Paling blushed and softly said, "As you bid, Lord." Han Li withdrew his wanton gaze from her body. He took a purple jade medallion out from his robes and placed it on the table. He said with a cold voice, "Return and handle your affairs. Pick a mountain for your cave residence as well. This is a restriction medallion for the surrounding formations. If you wear it on your person, you will be able to leave my spell formations as you please. Once everything is prepared, I will place down a sole restriction on you and have you officially become my concubine. But let's get the ugly talk out of the way first. I don't care if you have an ideal husband or a beloved. Cleanly sever ties with them. You are my concubine now. If you still have feelings of longing for them and still possess relations with them, don't blame me for being ruthless. Now is the time to withdraw if you still possess any second thoughts. Since I was small, I've dedicated myself to walking the path of immortal cultivation. How could I have a beloved? Besides, I have steeled my resolve. I won't back down when the matter has already been decided." Without a further thought, the woman nimbly took the jade medallion. Han Li nodded his head and said no further. Soon after, he summoned a huge ape puppet and had it guide Mu Paling outside. Mu Paling revealed a trace of surprise upon seeing the puppet. The puppet fearsomely held a level of spiritual chi similar to her own. She was also puzzled as to why the white-clothed woman wasn't there as well. However, she knew that it was best to avoid probing too deeply and obediently kept quiet, following the puppet out from the cave residence. Once the woman left, a white fox walked out from what appeared to be an empty corner of the room. "Since Master planned on taking this woman as a concubine for her punishment, why did you agree to wait 30 years? Could it be you have other plans?" Han Li calmly admitted, "Of course I do. To tell the truth, I have no plans to touch her before she reaches core formation." Silvermoon hopped onto the table in front of Han Li and gazed at Han Li in a puzzled manner. Why might that be?" When Han Li saw her adorable appearance, he couldn't help but smile. He took out a pink jade talisman from his waist and placed it on the table. "You recall the storage pouch I looted off the disciple of Archsaint Six Paths? This jade slip was in his storage pouch. It contains many Devil Dao pair cultivation arts." Silvermoon looked at the jade slip and then glanced at Han Li with a trace of suspicion. Since Han Li took this out, she knew that Han Li would continue his explanation. As expected, Han Li lightly stroked the pink jade slip with his finger and unhurriedly said, "There are many secret techniques contained inside this jade talisman. Although they are more powerful than ordinary pair cultivation techniques, the difference can't be considered much. However, there were two secret techniques among them that were particularly exceptional. One of them, the dragon guiding arts, are particularly suitable for core formation males, allowing a core formation cultivator to unceasingly draw on the vital yin essence of a woman with a special constitution, greatly raising their cultivation. For this secret technique was certain to cause great harm to the woman's origin chi. As such, any male cultivators using this technique would best have many concubines. Considering the many foundation establishment women at Archsaint Six Paths Disciples' side, he should have cultivated this technique. Otherwise, there would be no way he could have cultivated to late core formation stage at his young age, no matter how amazing his aptitude. After all, he didn't have a miraculous bottle that could age plants. For the other technique, the copulative essence arts, it's a secret pair cultivation technique that is specialized for nascent soul men. Unlike the dragon guiding arts, it requires a woman to possess cultivation at core formation stage. Once a woman cultivates this technique to a deep enough stage, the male cultivator would be able to forcefully break through a cultivation bottleneck in an instant by seizing her vital yin. It is only natural that I wish for this woman to cultivate with all her might. This technique requires a woman possessing deep cultivation after all. Dragon guiding arts, copulative essence arts, isn't it an exaggeration for a pair cultivation technique to be so fearsome? The small fox blinked and revealed disbelief. Han Li sighed and said, "I had similar thoughts to you at the beginning. For a pair cultivation technique to be so fearsome, it's simply unprecedented. However, I discovered the name of the person who established these pair cultivation techniques inside the jade slip, and my doubts were immediately dispelled." Silvermoon seemed to have thought of something and couldn't help but softly shout, "Yi, could it be?" Han Li said with a deep voice, "That's right. These two pair cultivation techniques were personally established by Archsaint Six Paths. Since he is a late nascent soul cultivator and is renowned as the #1 figure in the scattered star seas devil Dao, these two techniques should be greatly effective. Otherwise, Archsaint Six Paths, disciple couldn't have kept it so closely on his person." Silvermoon tilted her furry head and hesitantly asked, "So Master plans on using this woman to cultivate?" "That's right. Once this woman reaches late core formation stage, we will both cultivate the copulative essence arts, and once I reach a bottleneck, I will use this technique to break through it. After all, there are few medicine pills that are capable of assisting in the cultivation of a nascent soul cultivator. From now on, my cultivation speed will be pathetically slow. Since a vast majority of nascent soul cultivators are stuck at the early stage, it can be observed that it is extremely difficult to break through the bottleneck to mid-nascent soul stage. As such, I must make an attempt, regardless of the validity of the technique's effects. It is only a pity that according to what was described, the bottleneck breakthrough will only occur for the first time the technique is used. It will have this effect once the woman's vital yin is taken. Of course, this technique also benefits the woman involved as well, but not nearly to the extent of the male cultivator. Tell me, did you think that I truly thought I acquired a concubine merely because I could?" Hanley glanced at the white fox at the side and coldly smiled. Silvermoon appeared to sigh with relief and smiled. "At first, I did. I had thought that Master has grown proud after forming a nascent soul and thought to take in a concubine as a result." And Han Li heard this, he wore a vague expression. He then expressionlessly said, "Although I will place the woman underneath a soul restriction, it is better that she doesn't learn of all the secrets in the cave residence. I will be able to control this woman's very life, but I cannot control her thoughts. Just because I treat her well doesn't necessarily mean she will be grateful. I will first treat her with great caution so I may avoid being betrayed from a moment of carelessness. This martial ant Mew is rather intelligent, but it would be best to keep watch of her. If she truly wishes to follow me and is unswayed by the wills of others, I will not treat her unfairly and will assist in her cultivation. After all, I have an abundance of low-grade medicine pills. Silvermoon, keep an eye on her for me when you're free. It should be a trivial effort given your skills." Silvermoon obediently agreed. "Yes, Master. When you are in secluded cultivation, I will particularly pay attention to her." "That will do. These 30 years should be enough for me to read her. I hope she doesn't disappoint me." During that final sentence, Han Li's tone became sullen. Several days later, Mu Paling returned to the mountain and was subjected to a soul restriction by Han Li. Afterwards, she was gifted with a few bottles of medicine pills effective for foundation establishment cultivators. This gift had amazed her and caused her face to blossom with beauty from her delight. She eagerly expressed her thanks with adoring respect. It appeared this woman had truly thought of herself as his concubine. After the silver-haired old man and cultivator Lu were notified that Han Li had taken her in as a concubine, they expressed their congratulations, and each gifted a top-grade magic tool to Mu Paling. Han Li smiled in response and politely thanked them. From then on, Mu Paling began to dedicatedly cultivate at one of the smaller mountains surrounding the main cave residence, provided both with Han Li's guidance and medicine pills. During this time, Han Li would occasionally pay a visit to the cave residences of the other two nascent soul cultivators in the sect, humbly asking for cultivation instruction. Since the two drifting cloud elders intended to sincerely accept Han Li into their fold, they hid nothing from him, much to Han Li's benefit. In hindsight, Han Li felt his choice to stay was extremely wise. Several months later, Han Li was delighted to discover the spirit well tree in the medicine garden started to shed wine nectar. He hastily began to refine the brightsite water according to the instructions that the disheveled-haired cultivator left behind. With Han Li's grandmaster-level skills in medicine pill refinement, he quickly grasped the knack of refining the spirit water and found it easy to concoct despite his first few failed attempts. Currently inside the pill refinement room, Han Li was holding onto a small bottle of brightsite water that he concocted earlier. His gaze flickered when something suddenly came to mind, and his expression soon became determined. He opened the bottle with one hand and caused his hand to flash with azure light in the other. A ball of translucent blue liquid flew out from the bottle and slowly made its way towards Han Li's forehead. By the time the water arrived in front of Han Li's forehead, it suddenly stopped and became completely still. Han Li looked at the water with narrowed eyes and remained silent. A short moment later, he opened his mouth and breathed out a small mist of azure light and enveloped the water. Then, as the water sparkled, two fine strands of water suddenly shot out and entered Han Li's eyes. Han Li felt his eyes warm up, but a moment later, the warmth turned into a bone-chilling cold. He shut his eyes and trembled from the sensation. TL note: the Sword Shadow Phantasm technique is now known as the Swordlight Reflection technique. Han Li meditated without any further thought and began to circulate the qi into his body. The icy sensation in his eyes only grew stronger. If anyone were standing in front of Han Li at that moment, they would have discovered that a layer of blue light began to weakly cover his eyes. An hour later, the icy sensation gradually faded away from his eyes, and Han Li deeply sighed. His eyelids trembled for a moment before they opened. He unconsciously glanced around with a trace of doubt on his face. Han Li glanced around and muttered to himself, "It doesn't seem that anything has changed. Could it be ineffective?" But after a moment more of thought, he suddenly poured spiritual power into his eyes and deeply glanced around. A blue light sparkled from deep within his eyes. "Yi!" Han Li couldn't help but shout out. He was able to see the restrictions in the silent room, and his eyes were stained light blue. However, his focus was disrupted from his surprise, and the scene before him returned to normal. Han Li glanced at the ball of spirit water still floating in front of him and thought, it was no wonder that cultivators at core formation stage and beyond hold no interest in brightsite water. This meager ability to barely see through anything is to little effect. There are many supplementary magic techniques that could achieve a far stronger effect. However, this is only the result of cleansing the eyes one time. If I were to periodically use the brightsite water, perhaps my eyes would gain a miraculous ability. I'm looking forward to it. Without any reservations, Han Li used the remaining brightsite water to repeatedly cleanse his eyes. This amount of spirit water was enough for over 10 cultivators to cleanse their eyes once through, but with Han Li's profound cultivation, he was able to consume all of it after only a few times. Once the spirit water was completely consumed, Han Li still observed no changes. It was only when he focused spiritual power into his eyes that blue light suddenly appeared within them. Its ability to see through restrictions wasn't particularly improved. As Han Li had plenty of time, he wasn't dejected by these results. It would just be a gradual process. On the second day, Han Li had a quick word with Silvermoon before he entered seclusion and took out the golden page that recorded the Azure Essence sword arts. This sword art was a complete set, containing 13 layers. The divine abilities of the sword art included the Azure Essence sword streaks, the protective sword shield, and the swordlight reflection technique. The first two techniques weren't particularly notable. Although they were easy to use, their power was nothing special. As for the sword-light reflection technique, Han Li was greatly satisfied by it. He made use of that divine ability to great and immediate effect, bringing many battles to a sudden conclusion. However, because his opponents had been truly too powerful, the might of this sword art wasn't well displayed. He was confident that any common cultivator with similar cultivation to his own would be incapable of blocking several hundred of swordlights that surrounded them. They would be skewered in an instant. As of current, he had already cultivated to the 10th layer of the sword art and could now make use of the sword art's new divine ability. It had been quite laughable. He had already acquired the entirety of the Azure Essence sword arts from the Golden Page, but the final passage containing the last divine ability had been obscured from him at the time, perhaps by intention of the page's creator. Although he clearly knew that the words of light had contained the cultivation method for the final divine ability, his cultivation had been too shallow at the time. Even when he was at late core formation stage, he was still incapable of reading the divine ability. When Han Li was first given the cultivation incantations for the 13 layers, he found the incantations for a realm higher than his own to be incomprehensibly profound. Despite reading through it several times, Han Li wasn't able to comprehend a lick of them, let alone be able to cultivate them. It seemed he'd have to be a stage from deity transformation stage before finally being able to comprehend the divine ability that was hidden. At the time, Han Li wasn't flustered by this. Due to fear of sect disciples overreaching their limits in the pursuit of greater power, it was common practice in the cultivation world to subject inheritances under cultivation restrictions. Han Li clearly understood that when his cultivation was at a great enough level, he would come to understand the cultivation method of the divine ability eventually. Now that he had reached nascent soul stage, reading the passage for the divine ability should pose no problem. With that thought, Han Li flung the golden page into the air and spat out a mist of azure light from his mouth, blowing the golden page into the air like a feather. He then began to flick his finger with a calm expression, repeatedly striking the golden mist with azure essence sword streaks. Each glint of light was cleanly absorbed by it. With Han Li's current profound spiritual power, it had been far quicker to react than when he was at foundation establishment stage. A short moment later, the golden page absorbed enough essence and began to flourish with golden light. Strings of ant-sized characters began to continuously appear on the page. When Han Li saw this, he extended his hand towards the floating golden page without any hesitation, and it flew into his grasp with a whoosh. Suddenly, dense lines of light characters rushed towards Han Li's head. Han Li accepted the string of words with a calm expression. As a result, he was now able to clearly see the previously obscure portion of the Azure Essence sword arts. Without any further thought, he put away the golden page and immediately closed his eyes, examining the new acquired divine ability. The Aureate Sword Formation. What is this? Could it be related to spell formations? Han Li merely threw to read through the information, but the words Aureate Sword Formation immediately appeared in his mind in huge golden characters. He couldn't help but be astonished. The faintly gold characters of light began to appear within his spiritual sense, and he began to comprehend the incantations. He sat still in a cross-legged manner as 3 days unknowingly passed. During this time, Han Li's face wore an assortment of varying expressions from excitement to misery. Even dense beads of sweat would occasionally form on his brow. When the end of the 3rd day arrived, Han Li became calm once more. He sighed with a gloomy expression, opening his eyes to reveal deep thought. He pursed his lips and muttered with an odd expression. This sword formation could only be described as outrageous. Even if I only received 1/3 of its described power upon cultivating it to completion, I would be able to travel anywhere throughout the heavenly south region without hindrance. And Li muttered as he continued to ponder. However, being able to use this ability isn't a matter of a few years. I will need to use at least 100 sword lights if I am able to use this ability. It was no wonder the 2 golden pages fundamentally served as one. With one detailing the incantations and the other describing the bamboo cloudswarm swords, they are lacking without the other. I reckon the sword-light reflection technique was founded for the sword formation. Otherwise, the formation wouldn't have been possible. Of course, the more powerful the flying swords and the greater the number of swordlights, the more powerful the sword formation. And Li reckoned that with enough time he would be able to produce 4 sword-light reflections from each of the 72 cloudswarm swords, forming a grand sword formation of 360 swordlights. If any mid-nascent soul cultivators fell into the formation, they would be incapable of escaping unharmed if they managed to survive. Additionally, once his own cultivation progressed, he would be able to create even more swordlights, enabling him to slay even late nascent soul cultivators. But in addition to acquiring enough swordlights to establish a formation, he must use this divine ability to refine his bamboo cloudswarm swords once more, requiring a material known as auric essence. This material wasn't unknown to Han Li, as it was known by an extremely famous name in the cultivation world as honed gold. It was a rarely seen treasure on par with Han Li's piece of refined crystal he had acquired from those ironfire ants. However, some would say the auric essence was far more valuable. So long as a small piece of auric essence was used to temper a blade-type magic treasure, its incisiveness would be increased several times over. To sword or saber cultivators, this was a matter of life and death. However, this was quite troublesome from Han Li. Even if a single sword required a small amount of auric essence, it was an astonishing amount when multiplied by 72. Where would Han Li find such a large amount of honed gold? After all, as soon auric essence was discovered, it would either be applied to one's own magic treasure or would immediately be exchanged for needed items. It would quickly be used one way or another. Let alone the heavenly south region, this treasured material hardly ever appeared in the abundantly wealthy scattered star seas. It would be impossible for him to trade for this precious stone. As of current, the astonishing might of this aureate sword formation was fundamentally unobtainable, like flowery mist or the reflection of the moon in water. After further thought in the silent room, Han Li could only bitterly chuckle and set aside the matter for the time being. He then took out a jade box from his storage pouch and opened it to reveal a lustrous ball of golden light. Rolls of thunder faintly clapped as soon as it appeared. Celestial ice flames. When he glanced at this precious treasure, Han Li's expression grew sullen. With his current cultivation, he could now make an attempt to refine the flames. If he could successfully refine this icy flame, he could very likely acquire the heaven-void cauldron. In Chapter 241, Han Li acquired the complete sword essence sword arts from the Golden Page's Words of Light. Since the celestial ice flames would allow him to easily exterminate nascent soul cultivators, Han Li didn't dare to be careless. He possessed several techniques for refining devil fire, but he ended up choosing one of the secret techniques contained in the profound yin arts as he felt it to be the reliable. Having decided, Han Li attentively stared at the golden ball of lightning for a moment and extended his finger towards it. With a crackle, a fine sliver of lightning suddenly arced from his finger and shot towards the golden ball. Suddenly, the golden ball trembled several times before being dragged into the air by the sliver of lightning. It brightly shined as it floated. Han Li then sat down underneath it and raised his head to look at it with narrowed eyes. At that point, he began to form a series of complicated incantation gestures with his hands. With rolls of thunder, dense arcs of golden lightning began to flicker and form an impenetrable net of lightning surrounding the ball. Once the ball of lightning was surrounded by a large net of lightning, the scene grew still. At that moment, Han Li sighed and his spiritual sense stirred, connecting with the shell of divine devilbane lightning surrounding the celestial ice flames. Thunderous bellows reverberated throughout the room, and the golden sphere grew dazzling. Fine arcs of lightning began to repeatedly shoot out from the golden sphere, and its bindings relaxed, revealing a deep blue, translucent pearl underneath. It was continuously spinning. Han Li held his breath upon seeing the celestial ice pearl. Having personally witnessed its power, fear of it still lingered in his heart. With the ice pearl's appearance, Han Li spat out an azure flying sword from his mouth without further thought and momentarily pressed his hands together. A dense bolt of lightning suddenly shot out from his hands, simultaneously striking the ice pearl in an overbearing attack alongside the flying sword. The pearl cracked open with a boom. With a pulse of light, the sphere turned into an unstable sphere of blue flames. The sphere of flames then expanded before condensing into a fist-sized blue flower. Each of its petals glistened as the flower slowly blossomed. Simultaneously, a layer of blue frost began to spread throughout the walls, enveloping the entire room in a realm of freezing ice in the blink of an eye. However, Han Li had long prepared for this. Although a solemn expression appeared on his face, he remained calm, and a dense layer of blue light securely protected his body. With his nascent soul cultivation, he was able to completely protect himself from the assault of the icy flames, fearsome as they may be. Han Li felt somewhat relieved to see that the icy chi was unable to penetrate the light barrier protecting his body, and proceeded to point into the air. The net of divine devilbane lightning immediately shrunk back and enveloped the blue flower of light. Underneath the golden sparkling light and blue radiance, The huge blue flower began to change once more into a flame, attempting its utmost to resist the lightning net's constriction. Seeing that the celestial ice flames were restricted, Han Li took a deep breath and began to move his spiritual sense. Claps of thunder rang out as a small hole opened from the golden net, only to be mended a moment later. But in that short instance, a sliver of blue flame escaped and shot towards Han Li as if it were intelligent. Han Li expressionlessly clasped his hands in an incantation in response, and he closed his eyes. Azure chi began to flow out from the crown of his head, followed by the emergence of an inch-tall nascent soul. The nascent soul's face was strained. As soon as it appeared, it stared at the incoming wisp of blue flame, and it twisted its chubby arms, releasing 2 streaks of blinding azure light. At that same moment, it opened its mouth and spat out a fist-sized ball of light, resulting in 3 masses of azure light to meet the wisp of blue flame. The azure and blue flame clashed, but the blue flame was instantly enveloped by the azure light. Despite its struggle, the flame was truly too small and was easily overwhelmed. However, even as the flame wisp was trapped, it slowly dissipated the light. When the nascent soul saw the flame being successfully contained, a smile appeared on its face and beckoned to the azure light, bringing the flame wisp closer to it. After revealing a trace of hesitation and fear, the nascent soul eyes brightly glinted and grasped onto the azure light, shoving it down its mouth alongside the wisp of blue flame it contained. Shortly after, azure light flashed from its body, and the nascent soul disappeared into mist as it flew back into Han Li's head. Han Li's eyelids trembled several times in response, but his expression unchanged as if he were sleeping. However, his nascent soul sat cross-legged inside his dantian wearing a solemn expression. Its hands were forming an incantation gesture. Half a year later, Han Li emerged from the silent room with a gloomy expression. The celestial ice flames were truly ferocious. Although he had attempted to refine only a sliver of flame, it had taken half a year of hard effort. However, due to the flame's extreme coldness, he would need to nurture it inside his body for an additional year before he could truly control it. In order to prevent any mishap, he couldn't refine any more of the celestial ice flames during this time. As for the heaven-void cauldron, he refined far too little of the celestial ice flames to even think of attempting the next step. The reason why Han Li left seclusion now instead of continued cultivation was in preparation to meet the silver-haired old man and cultivator Lu. He wished to see if either of them had any news with regards to auric essence. Additionally, he planned on bidding farewell to the drifting cloud sect for some time. During his travels, he would pay a trip to the state of Yuan Wu in order to fulfill his promise with Xin Ryan. At his current cultivation, exterminating a cultivation clan should only be a trivial effort. As for the Fu clan and the 100 Possibilities sect and the state of Yuan Wu, they did share some history together. The Fu clan in the state of Yuan Wu was a distant branch of the Fu clan in the 100 Possibilities sect. However, the 2 clans grew distant over a long period of time, and the Fu clan in the state of Yuanwu had joined the Devil Dao, much to the resentment of the main branch who were part of the Heavenly Dao Alliance. As a result, both sides had cut relations to one another. Han Li grew greatly relieved from this turn of events. Although the state of Yuan Wu belonged to the Devil Dao, there would be few in that country that would be capable of stopping him. When Han Li left his cave residence, he visited the side residence in passing and swept his gaze inside the cave residence to discover Mu Paling strenuously cultivating in seclusion. From the light glistening from her face, it appeared that she had made great progress. Pleased with her results, Han Li left without disturbing her. He then headed straight towards the main mountain of the drifting cloud sect. 6 hours later, Han Li silently left the cave residence of the silver-haired old man. The old man didn't have any concrete information on any auric essence, but he had given him information that in 2 years, there would be a grand trade fair taking place in the 9-Nation Union state of Yu. It was known to be the greatest trade fair to take place in the Heavenly South region. Many rare materials would gather there from all around the Heavenly South region. Even half of the continent's nascent soul cultivators would each make a trip there. After all, nascent soul cultivators were the ones who most required precious materials. Since common materials and medicines were simply beneath their notice, their only option was to find trade meetings and acquire their rare needs there. The reason why the trade fair was to be held in the 9-Nations Union was because the 9-Nations Union was considered a neutral power. Due to the threat of the Mulan spell warriors, the other 3 powers had no fear of the 9-Nations Union harboring any wicked schemes. As a result, the cultivators of those 3 powers had no misgivings participating in the trade fair. Currently, Han Li could only hope that auric essence would appear at trade fair. Otherwise, he couldn't possibly know when he'd be able to use the Aureate Sword formation. He may even have to pay a visit to the legendary Great Empire of Jin, but that was truly too far away. After Han Li finished speaking to the silver-haired old man about the auric essence, he didn't mention where he wished to go. He only mentioned that he planned on traveling for some time as he just formed his nascent soul, and that he was taking his leave. When the silver-haired old man heard him, he wasn't doubtful in the slightest. He merely mentioned the affiliations of each country and the names of a few nascent soul cultivators that he must take notice of and never offend. At that moment, Han Li heard the name of this eccentric heaven-venge once more. Han Li was quite curious towards this cultivator and made a note of him. He then expressed his thanks to the old man and departed. On the morning of the next day, Han Li carried the most important items in his cave residence on his person and sealed his cave residence off using restrictions. He then departed from the Dreamcloud Mountains, flying in the direction of the state of Yuan-Wu. The Fu clan in the state of Yuan-Wu was once renowned as one of the 3 great sects in the country. When the Devil Dao invaded over 100 years ago, this clan hadn't resisted their invasion in the slightest and even provided assistance to the 6 Devil Dao sects. As a result, the Fu clan hadn't suffered the slightest damage from the invasion. Instead, they were given the opportunity to flourish. After overwhelming the other clans in the country, they became the #1 clan in the state of Yuan-Wu. Because the Fu clan had frequently placed many of their disciples into the Devil Flame sect, even giving their clan's gifted women to the Devil Flame sect's upper echelon as concubines, they were considered to be completely subservient to the sect. As a result, the Fu clan gained the support of the Devil Flame sect, the dominating power over the state of Yuan-Wu, and wildly flourished in the past 100 years. In Chapter 352, Han Li made a promise to Xin Ryan to avenge Qi Yuanxiao's death in exchange for their knowledge on formation spells and tool refinement. The Fu clan's main stronghold was located deep into a mountain range in the west of Yuan-Wu. The mountain range was known as the Purple Road Mountains as a purple mist sealed it off year-long. Mortals are never seen again once they tread deep into the mists, and if they stayed too long within it, their throats would swell and their eyes would sting. With prolonged contact, they would even die of poison. Although locals knew of the dangers of this mist and would well avoid it, there would always be ignorant outsiders who entered, only to perish. The Fu clan were aware of the mortals dying from the mist, but they hardly batted an eye. If mortals died, then so be it. The Fu clan had planned with such great effort to create the violet miasma cloud formation, requiring them to invite several formation masters to simultaneously work on it. Besides, these mortals could be considered lucky to have died by this formation. In the past several days, the violet clouds on Purple Road Mountain remained still as always, but a commotion rose from within. Occasionally, cultivators would appear outside the mist and shout something. Afterwards, they would reveal a lustrous red invitation before disappearing into the mist. The nearest mortal settlement to Purple Road Mountain was a small city named Tay. This city only spanned 5 kilometers, and its population didn't exceed 10,000. However, it had all the facilities one would expect from a city such as inns and restaurants. R was a waiter at one of the 2 inns of Tay City. Although he was only 19 years of age, he had been a waiter for 4 years. With his thin body, he stood at the side of the inn's doors and dispiritedly called out to those who walked past by. This wasn't because R was being lazy, but because the weather was scorching. After yelling in the hot weather for an entire morning, he no longer had any strength. Even that petty, crafty innkeeper Liu couldn't say anything in response to his dejected manner. Although he wore a dissatisfied expression, he could only grumble his complaints and gloomily handle his abacus, calculating the dense ledger on the table. R glanced at an expanse of white clouds in the sky and inwardly cursed with all his heart. Then, after lower his head, he muttered out to the passers-by in a manner even he couldn't hear and became even more dejected. Just as he thought whether or not he could take advantage of innkeeper Liu's inattention to speak into the kitchen for a few drinks of cold water to relieve himself from the heat, the sky suddenly dimmed and he felt a chill. R was surprised and he couldn't help but raise his head to the sky. But much to his shock, he discovered that 3 eccentrics had unknowingly appeared before him. One of the men wore hemp robes and a tall hat. He was short and resembled a large ball. The other was a bald man with piercing eyes. The last of them was a man with long hair draping over his face. His face possessed a sinister air and his eyes were ice cold. Having spent so many years as a waiter, R knew how to act. He immediately smiled and said, "Do you guests wish to stay at this inn?" From his years of many experience, this party were sure to be generous customers despite their fiendish appearance. The short, plump man glared with his small eyes and casually took out a large piece of silver. He shoved it into the waiter's chest and impatiently said, "Cut the rubbish. Why else would we come at an inn if not to stay there? Prepare a room on the second floor for us, and a table of top-rate food and wine for us as well." Without waiting for R's reply, innkeeper Liu jumped up and immediately acted like a robust man, leaping out of the gate and taking the silver piece out of R's hands. With an ingratiating expression, he said, "Yes, yes, please enter, sirs. Food and wine will be immediately sent for you. R, quickly prepare the rooms, don't be slow." "Yes, innkeeper." Although this action had caused him to feel deeply resentful, R could only obey. He could only sigh and allow the silver piece to be taken away. Were it not for the fact he only had the skills for a waiter and that there were only 2 inns in the city, he couldn't afford to say anything about this. After resentfully cursing innkeeper Liu in his heart, R brought the 3 each to a room on the second floor. Just as R departed from their side, the scorching heat suddenly returned. This sudden change caused him to feel a wave of doubt as he scratched the back of his head. After tilting his head in thought, he descended with confusion. A table of food was quickly prepared and was brought up with R and a few other servants. The cultivators were waiting at the table in complete silence. R was baffled upon seeing them. The cultivator with the draped hair coldly glanced in his direction as if he had noticed something. R instantly felt as if he were immersed in ice. With a shaken heart, he lowered his head and left the room in a panic. He directly returned to the inn's door with an restless heart. At that moment, the 3 in the room finally began to speak. Sensing that there was no one outside the room, the short and stout man chuckled and spoke to the man with the draped hair. "Old pal Han, why did you startle the mortal? Did you find him displeasing to the eye?" The draped-haired man flatly said, "It was nothing. It was just that waiter possessed spiritual roots. However, his aptitude is poor. He would only be able to reach the 4th layer of chi condensation stage." A trace of astonishment appeared in the fat man's expression. "Spiritual roots? That's surprising. However, it seems that Brother Han is actually able to see through spiritual roots without any physical contact. It appears Brother Han is quite a skilled individual." The draped-haired cultivator glanced at the fat cultivator and slowly said, "My cultivation isn't any higher than you 2 fellow Taoists. I merely cultivated a related secret technique." The fat cultivator sighed and bitterly laughed. "Brother Han is far too modest. However, that waiter can be said to have no prospects in the cultivation world. Even if he managed to somehow reach foundation establishment stage like us, if he doesn't have the backing of a sect, he will merely be a wild lone wolf, a target of humiliation to cultivators of a similar grade. We ourselves came to Purple Road Mountain to bid the Fu clan ancestor a happy birthday to see if we have the opportunity to join the sect. If we are able to catch the eye of a devil Dao sect or the clan ancestor, we'd be quite fortunate. It is just a pity that us vagrant cultivators can only enter the Fu clan castle on the ancestor's birth date. We still must wait another month." The draped-haired cultivator indifferently grunted and nodded his head as if he were disinclined to further speaking. The fat man and the bald man couldn't help but look at each other in response. The bald man widely opened his round eyes and said with a muffled voice, "Brother Han, us 2 brothers only formed a party together to go pay our respects to the Fu clan castle. But in the past several days, we realized that while you are also a vagrant cultivator, your cultivation is unordinary. Where might you have cultivated previously? We've never heard of your esteemed name before." After the large, bald man finished speaking, the eyes of the fat cultivator glinted and he began to stare at Han Li. The draped-haired cultivator's face remained unchanged. He merely indifferent replied, "I was once a cultivator of the state of Yue. I've only came to the state of Yuan Wu recently. It isn't odd that you fellow Taoists haven't heard of me." The fate cultivator blinked and asked, "The state of Yue? Isn't that the territory of the Ghost Spirit Sect? Why did Brother Han not try his luck with the Ghost Spirit Sect instead of coming to our state of Yuan Wu?" The draped-haired cultivator calmly replied, "I did try, but there is no path forward. Given that the Ghost Spirit Sect is the sole power in the state of Yue, it doesn't tolerate the existence of outside cultivators. As such, I came to the state of Yuan Wu to try my luck. However, I didn't expect to come across the Fu clan ancestors' birth celebration as soon as I appeared. I couldn't possibly have easily allowed such a rare opportunity to pass me by. So it was like that. It must have been difficult for Brother Han. The fat man chuckled and asked nothing else. Instead, he began to chat about a few of the rumors circulating throughout the cultivation world. Once the wine and food were finished, the draped-haired cultivator bid his farewell and decided to rest in a neighboring room. Once the draped-haired cultivator left the room, the fat cultivator's beaming smile instantly disappeared, only to be replaced with a sinister expression. He suddenly took out a talisman from his robes and formed a hand incantation. Then, with a flash of light, the talisman dissolved and enveloped the room in a soft light. This talisman was a soundproofing talisman. Once the talisman was in full effect, the large, bald man hastily asked, "Brother Luo, do you believe that youngster is truly a vagrant cultivator?" The fat cultivator sneered and stroked the fat underneath his chin. He sinisterly said, "Certainly not. He's most likely a disciple of a small sect." The short and stout cultivator explained with a proud expression, "Did you not see his magic tool when we were traveling together? That was clearly a top-grade magic tool, not to mention the many storage pouches at his waist. They were all bulging and there were even a few spirit beast pouches there. How could a vagrant cultivator possess so many items? It is clear that this cultivator came from a small sect. If he came from a large sect, he would have been too arrogant to travel with the likes of us. Additionally, he didn't take out an invitation card to enter Purple Road Mountain. Hee. After all, given how powerful the Devil Dao are, small sect cultivators wouldn't dare to act so openly. All of them would sneakily act as vagrant cultivators for fear that they would attract the Devil Dao's ire and subject calamity upon their clan for generations to come. That is why we've never heard of him despite his strong cultivation and magic tools." Eyes filled with avarice, the bald man rubbed his hands in eagerness. "From what Brother Luo has said, that does seem to be the case, and we can boldly attack him without worry. Although he is somewhat wary of us, he definitely wouldn't have thought that we were concealing our true cultivation. It should be quite easy for us two mid-foundation establishment cultivators to kill an early foundation establishment cultivator. That youngster is bringing about his own doom to come across the dual fiends Pengye." The fat man licked his thick lips and sinisterly said, "Of course, but in order to smoothly succeed, we lower his guard as much as possible. It will take much less effort if we launch a sneak attack. Let's wait 2 days prior to the Fu clan ancestors' birth celebration to attack. Yes, let's do as Brother Luo says. Even if neither of us makes it into a sect of clan, we'll still make quite a bit of profit." The bald man seemed quite confident in the fat man, and he wore a grin on his face. The fat man chuckled and said, "Hee, of course. If such an easy mark comes knocking on your door, how could the dual fiends Pengye return empty-handed?" While the two chatted without restraint about killing the draped-haired man, the man in question sat down expressionlessly in the other room. However, he was able to easily hear their words as if the soundproofing barrier didn't exist. Hanli opened his eyes with a cold glint and softly said, "Since you've taken the initiative to court death, don't blame me for being ruthless." He then closed his eyes once more and continued to refine qi. To tell the truth, Han Li had arrived in the state of Yuanwu 2 months prior. He had passed through many countries affiliated with the righteous and devil Dao along the way, but as a nascent soul cultivator, he was able to stealthily pass through with his cultivation and appearance concealed. After Han Li arrived in the state of Yuanwu, Han Li didn't immediately take action. Instead, he gathered information on the Fu clan from the local market cities and vagrant cultivators. As a result, Han Li found rather displeasing information about the Fu clan. This wasn't because the 3 Fu clan core formation cultivators were troublesome to kill, but that the Fu clan had many of their disciples located in the Devil Flame sect. Even with his vast abilities, he couldn't directly contend against the Devil Flame sect itself. And if he didn't kill the entirety of the Fu clan at once, the Fu clan could one day rise to prominence once more, leaving his promise with Xin Ryan unfulfilled. Just as Han Li was making a plan for action, rumors of the Fu clan ancestors' birth celebration spread throughout the state of Yuanwu. When Han Li heard this, he rejoiced. Since the Fu clan lord took the initiative to call upon his clan disciples to pay their respects to him, the Fu clan disciples of the Devil Flame sect should also be returning to the Fu clan castle. This was an ideal opportunity to deal with the entire Fu clan in a single blow. However, given Fu clan's current power, not anyone could participate in the celebration. One must either be a cultivator from a clan or be a member of the Devil Dao. As for vagrant cultivators, they had to be at foundation establishment stage in order to enter the castle. After Han Li acquired the finer details, he patiently waited a month to pass by. As for the dual fiends Pengye, They immediately chatted with him along the road when they saw that Han Li possessed an unordinary magic tool. When they heard that Han Li was also heading to the Fu Clan castle, they happily raised an invitation to travel together. Han Li could tell the two harbored sinister designs at first glance, but he had nothing to fear from the two, given his current cultivation. Instead, he casually agreed to travel with them with plans to use their identities to allow him to enter the Fu Clan without suspicion. But he didn't expect that only cultivators with invitations would be allowed inside the Purple Road Mountains. Vagrant cultivators could only enter the castle on the day of the celebrations. This was to Han Li's surprise, but it didn't matter. After all, that day should be when all the Fu Clan disciples and members should gather together. If he were to act any earlier, he would scare a few away. As of current, he was staying at an inn and hadn't yet planned on how he should deal with the dual fiends Pengye. Since the two were incapable of staying patient, Han Li wasn't going to be merciful. In the following days, Han Li and the dual fiends Pengye took a few trips nearby and would return to the inn at night to cultivate. The time of the Fu Clan celebration drew near. In these few days, the two spoke quite effectively with Han Li and even addressed him as Brother Han, as if they were good friends for many years. At that moment, many vagrant cultivators began to gather at the small city. While a majority of vagrant cultivators were accustomed to the outdoors, a few cultivators more fond of creature comfort stayed at the two inns of the city. As a result, Han Li came across several other cultivators at the same inn. When these cultivators came across Han Li and two cultivators at their side, their expressions vastly changed, and they steered clear of the three, doing their utmost to avoid talking to them. Han Li wasn't sure whether or not he should laugh or cry. It seemed the two at his side held a rather notorious reputation among vagrant cultivators. When the dual fiends Pengye saw this, they feared that Han Li would grow suspicious and fabricated a story that the two didn't get along with other cultivators. As a result, the two alternated keeping watch of Han Li, preventing him to speaking with anybody else. When Han Li heard them, he was completely indifferent. However, the fat man grew somewhat doubtful, but his greed got the best of him. 2 days later, the two cultivators suddenly urged Han Li to visit a nearby scenic spot with them. They said that the scene was fascinating and was too good to miss. After Han Li heard them, he knew that the two finally planned to attack. With a curt agreement, he followed the two with a smile, and the three head out from the inn towards this scenic spot. Because there were far too many cultivators nearby, the two could only think of bringing Han Li out 50 kilometers from the city to a small remote mountain. Once they all landed, the fat man began to speak with a beaming smile. "Brother Han, take a look. There is a small valley past this mountain. There are pure flowing streams and flowers of countless sorts. It is absolutely..." Despite the plain surroundings, he managed to continue his fanciful words about how impressive the scenery was. When Han Li heard this, he continued to derisively laugh in his mind. There truly was a hidden valley past this mountain, but apart from the passable scenery, there was also the spiritual fluctuations of a hidden restriction. It was very faint, but he was able to detect it with his spiritual sense. It appeared the two were quite experienced at killing others as they placed down a rather simple spell formation. If Han Li truly were an ordinary Foundation establishment cultivator, he would have found it difficult to survive if he entered the formation and were suddenly attacked by the two. When Han Li finished listening to the fat cultivator, he casually swept his gaze around and mysterious smiled at the two. "This scenery is not bad and there is no one here. From how I see it, there is no purpose in going to the valley. Right here should be fine. What do you two think? No one would be disturbed if you were to kill someone here and rid of their remains. It should surely go unnoticed." When the fat cultivator heard Han Li, his expression changed and he flusteredly spoke as if he were truly surprised. "Brother Han, what do you mean? Could it be you've misunderstood something?" However, his chubby hands had already moved to his storage pouch. As for the large, bald man, a savage expression appeared on his face, and he silently moved to Han Li's side with his hands tightly clenched. Han Li held their petty maneuvers in little regard and remained in place with a serene expression. When the fat cultivator saw this, he grew anxious and faintly felt a sense of foreboding. However, it was far too late to back down and merely moved to attack simultaneously with the bald man. In the same moment the two men moved to attack Han Li, a chuckle suddenly broke out. "Hee, how interesting. I didn't think I'd wake up from my nap to see murder and plunder, but for two Foundation establishment cultivators to attack a nascent soul cultivator, could I be dreaming?" These words were said by the soft, sharp voice of a young girl. Once Han Li heard this, his expression changed. As for the fat and the bald cultivators, they were thunderstruck and immediately turned deathly pale. A nascent soul cultivator. The fat cultivator shrieked and stared at Han Li as if he were looking at a ghost. The bald man was greatly frightened as well, but he appeared to have thought of something and hastily shouted, "That's impossible. His colleague must be attempting to scare us off." Although he had attempted to rouse himself, he still took 2 steps back while continuously glancing around for the young girl. His courage greatly recovered when he found no one. At the moment, Han Li was far more alarmed than the dual fiends Peng Yi. For some unknown reason, he felt his body break into an indescribable shiver as the nascent soul that had been deep asleep in his dantian awoke in a panic. A trace of dread had even appeared on its face. But what was most astonishing to Han Li was that, after sweeping every inch of a 5-kilometer radius with his spiritual sense, he was incapable of finding the source of the voice. But from the sound of it, the owner should clearly be nearby. Despite using the great development technique alongside his nascent soul cultivation, he was unable to discover the speaker. Could it be this person possessed deep and profound abilities? Han Li's throat dried up at the thought. The fat cultivator regained a bit of color in his face as if he had been roused by the bald man's words. He calmly glanced around and said, "Who's there? Who is it that is deceiving us? You dare to trick the dual fiends Peng Yi?" His body was covered in the glow of a barrier of yellow light as a small black shield appeared in front of him. The girlish voice boldly said, "He. If you could see this old woman, I'd kill myself out of shame. However, the spiritual sense of this nascent soul cultivator is quite strong. If it were even slightly stronger, perhaps you'd be able to find me." Han Li's expression grew sullen, and he did his utmost to sweep his spiritual sense over everything in his surroundings. Even with his exceptional spiritual sense, he was unable to find even a trace of another cultivator. He felt that this was far too strange. I am a tad hungry. How about I make a meal out of you 3? It's been a while since I've had a taste of a cultivator's nascent soul. I long to experience it once more." The girl's tone was completely free of malice, in stark contrast to the meaning of the words being said. Han Li snorted and ceased concealing his cultivation while his expression remained unchanged. With a flash of azure light, an astonishing pressure began to emit from his body, and many azure lights flew out from his mouth. These were the 72 bamboo cloudswarm swords. He truly is a nascent soul cultivator. Senior, please spare our lives. Us juniors had eyes but were blind to your magnificence. We didn't mean to offend Senior. Second brother, what are you doing? Don't run. We don't stand a chance before Senior Han. The fat cultivator couldn't help but feel completely awed after the emergence of Han Li's true cultivation, and immediately kowtowed before him as he pleaded for his life. As for the huge man, he did the opposite, and slapped a golden talisman onto his body. He abruptly traveled through the sky in a streak of golden light. "You truly believe you'll be able to run away with a gold-speed talisman?" A derisive expression appeared on Han Li's face. He pointed his finger, and a flying sword loudly rang out before disappearing with a glint. But in the next instant, it appeared at the side of the golden streak not far away. In a flash of azure light, the large man miserably screamed, and the golden light dissolved into specks. The man's body had already disappeared. What a shame. A foundation establishment cultivator's soul also has a fine taste. I only had them 8 times before I awoke. The girlish voice grumbled with slight annoyance. When Han Li finished dealing with the bald man, he ignored the fat cultivator trembling before him and turned his gaze to a small tree nearby. With blue light flickering within his eyes, he said, "There is no need for your esteemed self to act so mysteriously. Are you not also a mere nascent soul cultivator? For you to speak so boldly, it seems you want me to personally drag you out." The girlish voice paused for a moment before coldly continuing, "How did you discover me? My light transmutation technique isn't something that a nascent soul cultivator can see through. Regardless of my method to discover you, will you not reveal your true form? Or would you rather I chop down that tree of yours?" Han Li's voice remained calm, but his heart was filled with trepidation. He had only found the source of the voice by a fluke. In his panic, he had unconsciously swept his surroundings using the ability granted to him by the Brightsite water. As a result, he found a small tree nearby that was somewhat unlike the others. With a resolved heart, he confronted it, no longer wishing to be deceived. "A mere nascent soul cultivator. Your tone is also quite bold. I wonder how your nascent soul will taste once I swallow it." As the girl's tone grew sullen, the small tree flashed with green light, shrinking to reveal a person only half a foot tall. This small person had an exquisite face and long hair. However, its body was composed of green light and completely bare. It seemed this small silhouette was the source of the girlish voice. A nascent soul? No, that's not right. After further examination, Han Li appeared hesitant. The small silhouette looked at Han Li and slowly said, "A nascent soul? You aren't wrong. But you are quite out of luck to be the first nascent soul cultivator I've seen since awakening, or maybe my luck is just good." Soon after speaking, the small silhouette flashed and appeared before the fat cultivator. It giggled and said, "Your soul would make a good fit in my stomach, yes." "No, senior, please spare me." Realizing that this small silhouette was in existence on par with a nascent soul cultivator, the fat cultivator pleaded for his life as he jumped away, wishing to flee. However, a malevolent expression surfaced on the small silhouette's face, and its body turned into a ball of green light that shot into the fat cultivator. An instant later, it came out of the man's body back in its original form, except with a thumb-sized green ball of light that was intermittently twinkling. As for the leader of the dual fiends, Pengye, he had already collapsed onto the floor and was no longer moving. The small silhouette didn't bother to speak any further and simply gobbled the ball of light with a few bites. Afterwards, the silhouette's body grew slightly more concentrated. Han Li could no longer keep calm upon seeing this. After pursing his lips, he harshly shouted, "Are you ghost or man? You dare to directly consume a soul?" He had clearly felt the small silhouette's cultivation to be similar to his own at the early nascent soul stage. But after it consumed that soul, it grew a sliver stronger, clearly demonstrating that it could increase its cultivation by directly consuming cultivators' souls. It was inconceivable that this was the result of a technique. The incandescent green silhouette ignored Han Li's question and instead glanced at Han Li's dantian as if it were directly looking at his nascent soul. It wore a greedy expression and muttered, "The appetizer is done, and now it is time for the banquet. After consuming your nascent soul, this old woman will be able to directly enter mid-nascent soul stage." "You want to swallow my nascent soul? I'm afraid it'd be too much for you to stomach." Han Li furiously grinned and he clapped his hands together. A muffled explosion sounded out, followed by thick golden lightning arcing between his palms. Ever since Han Li had entered nascent soul stage, he was able to directly store divine devilbane lightning from his swords into his body. As a result, he was able to use the lightning as before despite having all 72 swords outside of his body. The green silhouette tilted its head upon seeing the golden lightning in Han Li's palms and muttered, "Golden lightning? Where did I hear of this before? I can't seem to recall it." Han Li raised his brow and indifferently said, "Then how about giving it a taste? I'm sure you'll recall it." At that moment, the lightning in his hands transformed into a python and fiercely pounced towards the small silhouette. For some unknown reason, the small silhouette remained in place with a smile and directly swallowed the python. Afterwards, countless arcs of lightning bursted from all around the small silhouette. A short moment later, the silhouette glowed with golden lightning and released pangs of thunder. Han Li narrowed his eye, lacking the slightest joy in his expression. Since the opponent dared to directly receive the divine devilbane lightning, they were clearly well prepared and weren't about to easily be dispatched. Before the golden glow faded away, the girl's laughter interrupted the sounds of thunder. "As I thought, is this not divine devilbane lightning? Isn't this just great? It's hard to believe that a mere early nascent soul cultivator could possess such a heavenly treasure. However, don't think that this old woman is a devil or ghost cultivator. Using that lightning to deal with me is beyond its abilities." The small green silhouette hadn't taken the slightest damage from Han Li's strike and sneered at Han Li. Han Li scoffed, "It's too early to be proud. If you truly wish to devour my nascent soul, it's going to take more than a few arrogant words. If I had guessed correctly, you can only consume the souls of low-grade cultivators. To speak of consuming a cultivator's nascent soul is pure fantasy. Perhaps you might have been able to previously do this, but as of current, your mind may wish it, but your body is weak. You are only capable of assuming that strange form of yours. Enough rubbish, let's first see how you fare against these flying swords." These words caused the small silhouette's expression to vastly change, revealing malice from its eyes. At that moment, Han Li pointed to the flying swords spiraling above him. With a clear ring, 12 of the flying swords shot forward in a streak of azure light. The small green silhouette stood in place with a sullen expression. As the dozen of azure swordlights spiraled around the small person and sliced it up into countless strands. As these strands remained floating in the air, they began to sparkle, much to Han Li's alarm. Bewildering chuckle soon came from strands, and they flickered with light, before restoring the small silhouette in its original form. The silhouette seemed to have been completely infuriated by Han Li's words. It ominously, "Ch, not bad, not bad. Your set of flying swords must have been created from golden lightning bamboo. Although I don't know how you acquired so much of it, it is truly ridiculous to think of injuring me with those swords alone. You will come to know that my words aren't born of arrogance." The silhouette then formed an incantation gesture with its hands, and blinding green radiance gleamed. But before it could fully finish casting its technique, bright light flashed from above its head. 12 flying swords simultaneously pulsed with lightning, and formed a dense net of golden lightning as it charged towards it. "Humph, this junior still won't give up. Did I not say that the divine lightning has no effect on me? Wait, what are you doing?" The girlish voice became shrill as if it grew frightened. The net of golden lightning didn't explode as it had anticipated. Instead, the net remained firm when it caught the small silhouette, and it unceasingly tightened around the silhouette. The small silhouette knew that this was far from good, and its body flickered with green light in its utmost attempt to resist. However, its struggle was in vain, as it was soon trapped in a large golden ball. When Han Li saw this, he couldn't help but wryly smile. This net of divine devil-bane lightning was a technique that was founded by Han Li. Because golden lightning bamboo was exceeding rare, only 1 or 2 stalks would be used in the formation of a magic tool, and since they had a limited amount of divine lightning, they were only reserved as a trump card against devilish and evil techniques. Additionally, making such a large net of lightning would require over 10 stalks worth of divine devil-bane lightning to form. As such, none could have afforded to do this before Han Li. Having controlled the divine devil-bane lightning for so many years, Han Li already sensed that, in addition to an innate ability to subdue evil and devilish techniques, it also possessed the wondrous effect of restraining the 5 elements. Regardless of whether it was the sacred Usra flames or wind spirit energy, they had both been actively and securely subdued. This unexpected discovery was much to Han Li's delight. While he was still at core formation stage, he was unable to use lightning nets as he wished because of his lacking cultivation, and had rarely used them in battle. But with his vastly strengthened cultivation and spiritual sense as of current, he no longer had such problems. Although he didn't know where this little silhouette came from, he knew that it was neither flesh or ghost. It was more akin to a strange variation of a cultivator's nascent soul. With that thought, Han Li attempted to make use of the net. Unfortunately for the silhouette, although it had heard legends of the divine devil-bane lightning, it was unaware of its hidden properties. Else, it wouldn't have so casually received the attack with its body as a demon nascent. In the blink of an eye, this haughty figure had been easily confined. Seeing that it succeeded, Han Li smiled and raised his hand, shooting out an azure mist to collect the golden ball into his hand. The golden sphere faintly trembled and released furious, ear-piercing shrieks. "You dare to trap this old woman? Quickly release me, or else I will refine your soul and subject you to a fate worse than death." Han Li frowned and sullenly said, "Refine my soul? It seems your esteemed self still doesn't understand your situation. Let's talk about this again once you've properly calmed down." Claps of thunders rang out as lightning shot out from his hands. These thin slivers of lightning wrapped layers around the golden ball, consuming nearly half of his sword's lightning reserves. With some further inspection of the enlarged golden ball, he wore a satisfied expression. Paying no heed of the girl's raving shouts from the golden ball, Han Li took out a white jade box from his storage pouch and shut it inside. He then took out a few restriction talismans and slapped them onto the box without any hesitation, putting a sudden end to the rant. Han Li weighed the jade box in his hand, and his expression was once again normal. After putting the jade box away, he glanced down at the soulless body of the fat cultivator and indifferently turned it to ash with a fireball before calmly flying in the direction of the small city. A short moment later, Han Li leisurely made his way to the tavern and simply waited for the birth celebration to draw near. Not long after, there was a shocking discovery in the state of Yuanwu. The notorious murderers of vagrant cultivators, dual fiends, Peng Yi, had completely disappeared from the country. Not a single trace of them have been found. Of course, this signified to many that they had died. When this news reached around, the vagrant cultivators in the country cheered. There were those that said they were disposed of by a sect they offended. There was also word that they encountered an expert on their travels and were slayed as a result of their notoriety. For a time, all sorts of rumors filled the skies. Tens of thousands kilometers away in the distant state of Tianluo, was the nest of the 6 devil Dao sects. The Grand Spirit Mountains in the west of Tianluo spanned over tens of thousands of kilometers without interruption. The mountains were steep and were home to countless spirit beasts and exotic insects. It was the location of the controlling spirit sect's monastery. The instant the demon nascent was sealed, an old man's furious shout suddenly echoed from a pitch-black stone room. "Who is it? Who dares to imprison the wood spirit nascent? Servant, quickly contact the spirit-controlling sect members in the state of Yuanwu. If they are unable to find the wood spirit nascent in 3 months' time, then they will have to kill themselves for the sin of their failure. Also, they must act carefully not to let the Devil Flame sect be aware of this matter." Although the old man was furious, his orders were concise. "As you bid, Marshal Senior, I will pass down the commands." A man's stern voice came out from outside the room. The old man continued, "I'm not done. Also call for Yunjai and Liu Yuer to personally make a trip to the state of Yuanwu. They both have wood attribute spiritual roots and have the most suitable bodies for the wood spirit nascent. Perhaps they will be able to feel something if they go closer to the wood spirit nascent. However, have the 2 women be careful. Whoever restrained the wood spirit nascent is certain to possess great abilities. The 2 women wouldn't be able to confront him. So long as they find the person who imprisoned the wood spirit nascent, I will come to personally deal with them." The man's voice respectfully replied, "Yes, I will personally tell the 2 junior martial sisters to go. This martial nephew will now take his leave." Soon after the man's footsteps faded into the distance, a deep sigh filled the room, and the darkness became silent once more. Behind the concealment of the purple mist of the Purple Road Mountains, the Fu clan master Fu Tianhua was in high spirits with a flushed face. He viewed all the juniors in his clan with a kind face, leaving his juniors feeling overwhelmed with favor. They were all used to him wearing a more stern expression. This was of no surprise. The marital ancestor's celebration of 400 years of life was about to arrive. He was the oldest core formation cultivator in the clan, and even 2 of the Devil Flame sects, enforcers, were going to come today for his birthday celebration. This greatly increased the Fu clan's prestige. The Fu clan juniors didn't dare to be negligent, and were doing their utmost around the castle so that this birth celebration wouldn't result in a loss of prestige for the clan ancestor. After the Fu clan ancestor made a round through the castle, he seemed quite satisfied. He then entered a side hall with a few juniors in tow. The sharp-eyed, purple-robed Fu clan ancestor leaned against an armchair in the room and slowly said, "Kinger, have the honorable guests from the Devil Flame sect arrived yet? Is there something keeping them busy?" While his voice wasn't loud, it was filled with dignity, suitable for the man who led the Fu clan through over 100 years of prosperity. "Venerable ancestor, the Devil Flame sect's senior son has sent over a disciple stating that he and protector Mo will certainly arrive to offer congratulations. However, it will take 1 or 2 days more." A pale 40-year-old cultivator helplessly replied in a hurry. An old man with thin eyebrows and embroidered robe stood at the side of the pale-faced man and added on, "Even so, martial ancestor need not worry. The Fu clan maintained a steady relationship with senior son and Mo for over 100 years. They will arrive soon. As their sect's current heights was in significant part due to our Fu clan's backing, we can be considered to be closely tied together. Besides, we sent 2 of our clan's most outstanding female disciples as their concubines. They would be embarrassed not to come." The Fu clan ancestor twirled his long beard, and a cold glint flickered from his eyes. With his previous smile vanished, he said, "It's not that I'm worried whether or not Brother Sun and Mo will come, but I merely feel somewhat ill at ease at the day of the birth celebration approaches. It seems as if something great is about to happen. It is rather worrying. Has our Fu clan recently offended a particularly fearsome character or some larger sects?" When this was said, the people in the hall couldn't help but look at each other in dismay. After a long while, the pale-faced man carefully answered, "Venerable ancestor, you should also know this. Although our Fu clan has greatly flourished over the years, we've offended countless clans and small sects, but the most hostile to us are the Qin and Hu clans. Could they be plotting something? It definitely isn't those 2 clans. While those 2 clans were able to contend with us for some time, they no longer possess many high-grade cultivators. They don't have the capability to stir up trouble." The Fu clan ancestor coldly shook his head, but he soon frowned. With some further hesitation, he said, "However, if they were join hands with other small clans, they may take advantage of this opportunity to attack. They'd be able to greatly injure the clan's strength. After all, in order to curry favor with the Devil Flame sect, our Fu clan killed many of the 2 clans' cultivators for resisting the Devil Dao. As of current, The Qin and Hu clans have lost their backing and are hiding away. With the hatred they hold towards us, it isn't an impossible matter. With that said, the Fu clan ancestor's expression grew sullen. The embroidered-robed old man cautiously asked, "What does venerable ancestor mean?" In an instant, the Fu clan ancestor leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Then, with an adamant tone, he declared, "We will be calm on the surface, but remain inwardly vigilant. Double the sentries. Have the protective formation continuously activated without pause, and be particularly mindful of vagrant cultivators with unclear background." Yes, it will be arranged. The pale-faced cultivator immediately accepted the orders. Seeing that the Fu clan ancestor appeared to be in a poor mood, the remaining Fu clan juniors all stood in place, even not daring to breathe too loudly. The Fu clan ancestor suddenly said, "Tianyun, call over your third uncle. Have him take the ironback beast into his spirit beast pouch and bring it along with him to the birth celebration. Only he can control our Fu sect's sacred sect protecting beast." The embroidered-robed old man couldn't help cry out, "What? Didn't esteemed ancestor say that third uncle shouldn't be disturbed during the birth celebration because he was currently in a crucial point in his cultivation?" The Fu clan ancestor coldly snorted and said, "The past is the past, the present is now. Although cultivators can't always predict calamity as it appears, there are times where one's instinct is particularly sharp. It cannot be helped. In order to be careful, it is better for this old man to overly suspicious than having our Fu clan meet calamity." Seeing that the Fu clan ancestor was about to get angry, the old man obediently agreed, "Yes, ancestor, I will now call third uncle out of seclusion." He promptly left afterwards. Not yet finished, the Fu clan ancestor gave many more additional orders before finally feeling at ease. With so many preparations in place for contingencies, he felt as if matters would be taken care of. On a barren mountain outside of Violet Road Mountain, there was a group of 30 vagrant cultivators that were pointing at the purple mist and were whispering amongst them. Han Li was mixed among the cultivators and were examining his surroundings in silence as if he were a common recluse. It had come as a surprise to Han Li that there were so many vagrant Foundation establishment cultivators in the state of Yuan Wu. Only a small portion of them should have come to congratulate the Fu clan ancestor's age. Back when he was in the state of Yue, vagrant Foundation establishment cultivators were rarely seen. Although the state of Yuan Wu was somewhat larger than the state of Yue, the difference shouldn't have been great. But after 100 years had passed, this new development made Han Li feel as if the world had left him behind. However, Han Li was unaware that before the righteous and devil Dao attacked, a majority of Foundation establishment pills were held by sects and clans. Few ever made their way into the hands of vagrant cultivators. But with the upheaval from 100 years ago, many sects and clans ended up being exterminated. Destroyed inheritances and incense burning were common occurrences, resulting in a large quantity of Foundation establishment pills being spread in the chaos. Although a majority of pills were acquired by clans and sects, the small portion that managed to land into the hands of vagrant cultivators created a sudden increase of Foundation establishment disciples in each country, forming a large amount of force. There were even a few vagrant cultivators that had managed to reach core formation through chance. As the righteous Dao, the devilish Dao, and the heavenly Dao alliance, they all adopted a policy of absorbing all vagrant cultivators they could and suppressing those that resisted. As a result, the vagrant cultivators weren't able to form anything greater, despite their vast increase in number. As Han Li was mulling over this, he suddenly spotted 8 streaks of red light flying across the sky. After landing in front of the purple mist, the light faded away to reveal a group of cultivators wearing fire-red robes. There were 2 core formation cultivators leading the group. One had a face full of white hair and a gourd at his waist. The other had an ordinary appearance, but his eyes possessed a threatening chill. The vagrant cultivators became restless upon seeing the new arrivals. Some even whispered that they came from the Devil Flame sect. The more experienced vagrant cultivators spoke in particularly soft whispers, fearing that the Devil Flame sect members would hear them. Those are the Devil Flame sect's external affair, Enforcer's son, and Mo, the 2 female cultivators at their side, should be the renowned beauties of the Fu clan. I heard that they've already become the 2 seniors' concubines. Han Li naturally heard all of this with his spiritual sense. He couldn't help but sweep his gaze past the Devil Flame sect core formation cultivators and the 2 female cultivators at their sides. As expected, the 2 women were gorgeous beauties. The Devil Flame sect cultivators seemed to ignore the vagrant cultivators. A disciple from the party walked towards the dense mist and sent a voice transmission talisman into it. Afterwards, the disciple obediently stood behind the two core formation cultivators. A short moment later, the purple mist rolled away to reveal a passageway. Many Fu Clan disciples respectfully welcomed them in. Han Li took advantage of this opportunity to take a deep look at the many Fu Clan disciples before expressionlessly turning his gaze away. At that moment, the party of Devil Flame Sect cultivators entered the purple mist, and the passageway faded away. In the following 4 hours, a few cultivators from other clans and small sects began to successively arrive at the mountain and were similarly welcomed in. After another long while, a steward with an apologetic expression walked out from the mist. It is quite lacking in manners for our Fu clan to keep you fellow Taoists waiting so long. It is that our Fu clan looks down on you, but that there is finite space inside the Fu clan castle. It would prove quite chaotic for too many cultivators to be inside at once. As such, we could only have you enter the castle on the day of the celebration. Nevertheless, please be at ease. So long as you sincerely congratulate the venerable ancestor, we will treat you fairly. The feast has already been prepared inside the main hall. Please enter the castle. The steward spoke elegantly, dissipating a majority of the vagrant cultivators' discontent. Then, the vagrant cultivators silently glanced at each other before following the middle-aged steward into the mist. Han Li calmly walked at the back of the crowd, but a moment later, he disappeared from sight. Regardless of whether it be the cultivators walking ahead of him or the Fu clan disciples that were in charge of monitoring the sect, they had all failed to perceive this anomaly, as if Han Li had never been there. Many Fu clan Foundation establishment cultivators were currently standing in front of an extravagant hall. They beamingly welcomed the visitors, leaving them with a deep and warm impression. There were about 300 guests in the castle, with those having arrived today from those arriving days before. Now that the Fu clan ancestor's birthday has arrived, these guests gathered together in front of the main hall, waiting for the Fu clan ancestor's appearance. Given the Fu clan's immense influence in the state of Yuan Wu, the vagrant cultivators and smaller clansmen were spouting praises without end. Even the emissaries from larger clans were chatting with Fu clan cultivators with a wide smile. The Fu clan ancestor wasn't near the main hall as of current. Instead, he was within one of the castle's secluded pavilions. He was looking at a faint sparkling jade slip in his hand. Since he was the main character in the birthday celebration, he would be making his appearance at the last moment. He may as well take advantage of this idle time to handle a few more urgent matters as the Fu clan's master. In addition to the Fu clan ancestor, there was a large copper-skinned man sitting in the pavilion. His cultivation was at early core formation stage, and his waist was filled with variously sized pouches. The Fu clan ancestor suddenly slapped the table and shouted with a gloomy expression, "Humph, this isn't the state of Zijin. Those spirit-controlling sect want our assistance in acquiring information. Just what are they looking for? Do they consider our Fu clan to be subordinates? Absurd." The large man stroked his chin and curiously said, "There is no need for seventh uncle to be so angry. Does the jade slip mention what they're looking for? Surely this must be something important for the cultivators of the controlling spirit sect to act so nervously. It is irritating how they wish to use us, but still keep us in the dark. They merely want us to be mindful of any strange events that have taken place recently in the state of Yuan Wu and inform them as soon as anything occurs." A spirited glint appeared in the large man's eyes. He pensively said, "Oh, so it's like that. It seems the controlling spirit sect wishes to conceal this matter from the Devil Flame sect and sought our Fu clan out as a result. This must also be why they are speaking so vaguely." Old man twirled his beard and muttered, "Little third, your words seem true. In order to further protect our Fu clan, we should also secretly befriend the spirit-controlling sect just in case, in addition to serving the Devil Flame sect. While we've had friendly relations with the controlling spirit sect for some time, they still don't trust our Fu clan much. It seems we should take a look at our plans. Perhaps the weakest of the 6 sects, the ghost spirit sect, would also be good to befriend." "This may be. I didn't think that the Fu clan was colluding with the controlling spirit sect while so eager to please the Devil Flame sect. It is no wonder why your clan has been so prosperous the past 100 years. The large man's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the derisive voice of an unfamiliar man. The Fu clan ancestor and the large man felt shocked and simultaneously jumped up from their chairs. After glancing at each other in shock, the Fu clan ancestor loudly asked, "Who is the lord that honors the Fu clan with his presence?" "I Fu Tianhua, Hope Senior will forgive me for not welcoming him. There is not need to welcome me. I came here uninvited. As soon as that was said, azure light suddenly glowed from within the pavilion. The Fu clan ancestor and the large man shouted out in alarm and withdrew to a corner of the room in a blur. A translucent barrier appeared on each of their bodies. The Fu clan ancestor spat out a white flying sword and had it revolve around him. As for the large man, he grabbed onto the spirit beast pouch that was at his waist. It was black and unremarkable. At that moment, the light faded away to reveal an azure-robed cultivator. He appeared to be an unremarkable youth in his mid-20s. It was Han Li who had sneaked into the castle. At that moment, Han Li had his hands behind his back and swept his gaze past the two vigilant Fu clan elders. He slowly said, "My spiritual sense swept past your Fu clan castle and found that your cultivation was the highest amongst the few core formation cultivators in the castle. You must be the Fu clan's leaders." Han Li's expression was tranquil and revealed not the slightest emotion. With Han Li's cultivation unconcealed, the two core formation cultivators were able to sense Han Li's profound cultivation. In the old man's alarm, he forced a smile in spite of his apprehension and said, "So it turned out to be a nascent soul senior. May I ask why Senior honors us with his presence? Is there something that the Fu clan may assist you with?" Han Li narrowed his eyes and stared at the violet-robed old man at the corner of the room. "Are you the Fu clan ancestor?" Upon hearing Han Li's emotionless question, the Fu clan ancestor respectfully replied, "Junior doesn't dare to call himself an ancestor in front of Senior. Junior's name is Fu Tianhua, the current Fu clan master." The unease in his heart only became more fervent. He faintly felt that this nascent soul cultivator didn't hold any good intentions with his arrival. Han Li looked at the old man and revealed a strange expression. Since you're the Fu clan ancestor, it seems I hadn't found the wrong person. Since I've come to the Fu clan for reparations, it is better to first speak with your esteemed self." When the Fu clan ancestor heard Han Li, he felt his heart drop down an endless abyss. Reparations? Senior must be joking. This is the first time Junior has ever seen Senior. Is Senior mistaken? When the large man at the side heard this, his complexion became bloodless, and he couldn't help but grasp the spirit beast pouch with greater force. To hear of a nascent soul cultivator demanding reparations was a matter that was far from good. Han Li casually glanced in the direction of the large man and beamingly smiled. "Mistaken? That can't be. Originally, I thought to give you an explanation to avoid having you become wronged ghosts, but you've had a long history of dirty behavior, so I won't waste my breath. You two will be the first to go. I'll promptly send the rest of the Fu clan to accompany you on the other side." As soon as Han Li finished speaking, the Fu clan ancestor furiously shouted, "What? You wish to exterminate the entire Fu clan?" He took out a yellow talisman and quickly withdrew into the wall in a flash of light as if it were an illusion. It appeared to be a rarely seen earth movement talisman. "Just where could you possibly run away?" Han Li scoffed, but he didn't chase after him. Instead, he flicked his finger in a different direction. A streak of azure light appeared as quickly as it disappeared, penetrating through the chest of the large man at the corner of the room. His barrier had been instantly shattered. But in the instant the large man died, the spirit beast pouch flickered with light before soon fading away, releasing a faint roar. The large man's corpse fell to the floor, but Han Li didn't bother to look at him. As of current, killing an early core formation cultivator was child's play. However, he was somewhat interested in the spirit beast pouch in his hand and casually took it with a wave of his hand. Han Li then glanced at the wall. The Fu clan ancestor had disappeared in and smirked. With a wave of his sleeve, a white fox flew out and appeared before Han Li. Han Li ordered the small fox, "Use your earth movement technique to deal with the Fu clan ancestor. With your illusions and cultivation as a tool spirit, it should be quite easy for you to deal with a mid-core formation cultivator." "Of course, master. It will take just a moment. I will return quickly." The small fox revealed a proud appearance, and it disappeared from the pavilion in the flash of yellow light. At that moment, Han Li patted the storage pouch at his waist, releasing countless black-tainted gold-devouring beetles in the air. A moment later, a huge cloud of black, gold, and silver swirled above him. Go! Suddenly, the cloud of beetles separated into countless strands, instantly forming 100 small blades swarming out from the window. Han Li then sat cross-legged inside the pavilion and began to use the Great Development technique to envelope the entirety of the Fu clan castle in his spiritual sense. The direct descendants of the Fu clan were easily identifiable. Regardless of what they wore, They all cultivated several of the same techniques, all of which were revealed underneath Han Li's spiritual sense. As for the Fu clan mortals that were lacking any spiritual roots, Han Li took no notice of them. He merely directed the tricolored flying swords to devour the Fu clan cultivators. An instant later, miserable screams, shouts of alarm and the dense smell of blood filled the air. As this was occurring, the Fu clan ancestor was deep underground and was quickly flying through the earth through the use of the talisman. His only thought was to escape into the distance. As for disciples and juniors in the castle, he had no intention of thinking about them. Although he didn't personally see his large nephew die, he had already imagined what happened. Even with the Fu clan sect protecting Beast, escaping from a nascent soul cultivator was simply a pipe dream. However, the Fu clan ancestor would be perfectly content if he occupied his attention for even just a moment. As for the other Fu clan members, he wished to save them, but he lacked the strength. He would merely become another casualty. As such, he may as well just preserve himself. So long as the Fu clan ancestor still remained, the Fu clan could be considered to be alive. Apart from the Fu clan castle, there were many other Fu clan estates in the state of Yuanwu. Provided that he survived, the Fu clan would eventually rise once more. However, he was particularly depressed and puzzled about how the Fu clan had possibly attracted the ire of an unfamiliar nascent soul cultivator. He actually declared that the Fu clan would be exterminated as soon as he began speaking. Although this nascent soul cultivator was entirely emotionless, the old man felt his heart tremble upon recalling his expression. When the Fu clan ancestor flew out of scope of the Fu clan castle, he heard woman's soft voice speak. "Your earth movement technique is truly slow. How about you hand over your head and allow me to report back to Master?" The Fu clan ancestor was greatly shocked and couldn't help but stop. In a white blur, a gorgeous beauty appeared before him. She stood only a meter before him and faced him with an enchanting smile. "You?" Just as the Fu clan ancestor was about to cry out in alarm, the woman parted her sweet lips and blew out a pink fragrance mist, enveloping the vulnerable Fu clan ancestor in an instant. The Fu clan ancestor inwardly cursed. He hastily attempted to cast a spell and flee, but the sweet scent rendered his body lax and powerless. Before he could do anything to defend himself, he fell unconscious. When Silvermoon saw that her prey had fallen unconscious, she faintly smiled and casually waved her hand, sending a white crescent streak towards his neck. Blood splattered. Inside the large hall of the Fu clan castle, there were several hundred guests that were festively chatting. Several core formation cultivators that had personally come to pay their respects were kept company by a few of the higher-grade cultivators in the Fu clan. Friendly relations flourished between the guests and hosts. But suddenly, there were several screams of anguish that could be faintly heard from outside the hall. The bustling voices in the hall came to an abrupt stop, and many guests looked at each other in dismay. A few of the more quick-witted cultivators immediately turned their gazes onto the Fu clan cultivators. The blue-robed old man sitting at the side of the two Devil Flame sect enforcers also appeared shocked, but soon he wore a calm expression and loudly shouted, "Everyone, please do not worry. It is possible it is but a small matter. I will call over someone and see what's going on." He was the younger cousin of the Fu clan ancestor and was the third Fu clan core formation cultivator. At that moment, he excused himself from the company of the two Devil Flame sect enforcers and turned to the two Fu clan cultivators standing behind him. He immediately gave them orders to quickly rush out the hall and report back. The two Devil Flame core formation cultivators both appeared calm, but they glanced at each other with a trace of doubt. Two more miserable screams came from the outside. It was clear that the two Fu clan cultivators that were sent outside had met a vicious attack. The guests in the hall had clearly heard this, and their expressions vastly changed. The blue-robed old man's expression grew unsightly, and he deeply sighed before standing up. He said with a deep voice, "Activate the hall's restrictions and quickly send word to the ancestor." When a nearby Fu clan cultivator heard this, he acknowledged the order with a pale complexion. He then took out a sound transmission talisman from his robes and whispered a few words before releasing it. The talisman shot out from the roof in a streak of red light, but a moment later the cultivator spoke with a raspy voice. "Not good. The sound transmission talisman was shot down. We seem to be surrounded." When this was said, even the core formation guests couldn't remain calm. The pockmarked Devil Flame sect enforcer frowned and said, "Fellow Taoist Fu, it seems enemies have snuck into your castle. Brother Sun and I will go out with you and have a look." The blue-robed old man's anxiousness was greatly relieved upon hearing him. He immediately rejoiced and said, "I am greatly thankful for your assistance. I will have to trouble you to do so." The middle-aged man surnamed Sun frowned, as if disapproving of his companion's actions, but he followed him nevertheless. As for the remaining 4 core formation cultivators in the hall, they glanced at each other and didn't reveal the slightest intent to help. The others in the hall grew completely silent, watching the 3 core formation cultivators walk out from the hall. As the 3 calmly approached the hall door, loud buzzing suddenly came from outside the hall. The 3 couldn't help but halt their steps upon hearing this. In the blink of an eye, a 30-meter-long beam of azure light swept inside and wrapped around the 3 core formation cultivators. A dozen lines of fine azure light then shot out from the azure beam in a display of blinding brilliance, forcing the cultivators in the hall to momentarily close their eyes. In that instant, the azure beam spiraled throughout the hall. The blue-clothed old man and the 2 Devil Flame Sect cultivators halted, and their bodies grew motionless as if from shock. As the cultivators in the hall were stunned in their awe, they were completely oblivious to what was happening. The sudden shriek of a female cultivator attracted the attention of all in the room. The paled female cultivator was sitting at the side of a Fu clan steward whose head had tumbled down at an unknown time. The headless corpse was still sitting upright as blood sprayed from its severed neck. The other cultivators then discovered that tens of Fu clan cultivators, regardless of their rank, had their heads tumbling onto the ground in a silent death. The azure light, someone is using a magic treasure to attack them. Fellow Taoist Fu, you must. A cultivator who had decent relations to the Fu clan loudly shouted in alarm as if to warn the 3 core formation cultivators, but soon his words came to a sudden stop and his face became ashen. At that moment, the blue-robed old man and company suddenly split into pieces as if they were made of paper. Their bodies had collapsed into piles of gore. When this occurred, the guests of the birthday celebration felt their breath turn cold. Although these cultivators were able to somewhat keep their calm previously, they were now in a complete panic. Each of them enveloped themselves in a colorful barrier and filled the room with the bright glow of various colored lights. Magic tools of all sorts began to float in front of many cultivators. Even a few of the cultivators who held more than friendly relations to the Fu clan gathered together restlessly, with terrified expressions. For 3 core formation cultivators and tens of Fu clan disciples to be killed in the instant, how could it be anything else apart from the fearful existence known as a nascent soul cultivator? If it was truly a nascent soul cultivator, killing everyone else in the hall should be an extremely easy matter. As fear filled the hearts of those present, none dared to make any noise. Many guests presently felt vast regret for attending this Fu clan celebration. Wouldn't they be caught in the crossfire? Deathly silence filled the hall. A few of the core formation cultivators with stronger spiritual senses thought to stealthily release their spiritual sense to observe the outside. However, the Fu clan had placed down many spiritual sense restrictions in order to protect their secrets from prying eyes. As a result, they were blocked and couldn't help but resentfully curse the Fu clan. As anxiousness filled the hall, the voice of an unfamiliar man spoke. "Those present are restricted from leaving this hall for 2 hours. Those who disobey will be killed. After those 2 hours are over, you may leave as you wish." The man's voice was simple and cold, but it also carried an indescribable malice, shaking the hearts of those who heard it. Once those words were said, the cultivators in the room were greatly relieved. From his tone, it appeared that he had no intention of killing them. However, they clearly understood that they were spared most likely because they hadn't seen the man's true appearance. As such, none dared to disobey him. As for taking revenge for the Fu clan, the thought itself was a joke. Even if one had the capability, who would feud with a nascent soul cultivator over the mere Fu clan? The 2 hours passed by neither fast nor slowly. During this time, apart from a few whispers, screams of anguish occasionally came from the outside. They were curt and lasted only a moment. It was clear none in the Fu clan castle was able to retaliate as they were killed. The cultivators in the hall felt their heart tremble upon hearing these screams. Each of them guessed that the Fu clan had offended an expert or great power and was being exterminated as a result. There were many in the hall that felt schadenfreude or pity for them. After the time it took to finish the cup of tea, the screams in the Fu castle had ceased, and the outside became as silent as within the hall. The guests then glanced at one another, but none of them dared to act rashly. Once the 2 hours had passed, the man's voice didn't return. In the end, one of the braver core formation cultivators decided to leave the hall and he safely left. In the following moment, the other guests began to rush out with relief. The Fu Clan castle was entirely empty apart from a few bloodstains on the ground. It appeared that all of the direct lineage disciples of the Fu Clan had been exterminated, and even their corpses were burnt to ash. However, there were a few people that flew over on their magic tools and surveyed the entirety of the Fu Clan castle, only to discover that the mortals and low-grade external disciples of the Fu Clan were all unscathed. They even appeared to be completely ignorant of what had happened inside the castle. It seemed the attacker felt that killing off the direct lineage of the Fu Clan was enough to ensure its extinction. Having just experienced that frightful affair, these cultivators naturally didn't dare to remain. A majority of vagrant cultivators immediately set off, while a small portion of them temporarily stayed behind to have a whispered discussion before also departing. The Fu Clan's extermination was an extremely important matter to both friendly and hostile powers, and with 2 Devil Flame Sect enforcers slain as well, the Devil Flame Sect would now be forced to take action regardless of whether or not it was a nascent soul cultivator who had exterminated the Fu Clan. The witnesses of this incident quickly brought the information back to their sects and clans as quickly as they could. These powers needed to prepare for the vast changes that would soon occur. As the last few cultivators were hurriedly leaving the Fu Clan, many green-robed cultivators had arrived just outside the Purple Road Mountains. They were surprised to see that the restrictions protecting the Fu Clan castle were unmanned. At that moment, a few of the Fu Clan outer disciples entered the castle and discovered what was inside. These chi condensation cultivators made a huge uproar, and each of them had completely lost their minds to fear. The many green-clothed cultivators that were waiting in the air looked at each other in dismay upon seeing the panicked low-grade disciples. The top clan in the state of Yuan Wu had met their end at the hands of a mysterious nascent soul cultivator. Word of this event spread throughout the entire cultivation world in the state of Yuan Wu, raising an uproar amongst the various powers. With 2 of the Devil Flame Sect enforcers having perished during the Fu Clan extermination, the upper echelon of the Devil Flame Sect flew into a humiliated rage and sent out men to find the mysterious and vicious attacker who did this. They even stated that their own nascent soul founder wouldn't allow this expert to run free. However, those with sharper judgment would realize that the Devil Flame Sect was merely putting on airs and would most likely not take action. After all, according to the witnesses, the 2 Devil Flame Sect enforcers had recklessly taken the initiative to stand closely to a Fu Clan cultivator as the nascent soul cultivator was carrying out his revenge. It was merely bad luck. Even if the Devil Flame Sect was even more powerful and attempted to hunt down the murderer, cultivators weren't easily trapped or killed once they had reached nascent soul stage. They would need to dispatch 4 nascent soul cultivators of a similar grade or place down a fearsome restriction to even think of killing him. Of course, the Devil Flame Sect wasn't about to dispatch several nascent soul cultivators over revenge for a few core formation enforcers. Even if the sect was willing, the nascent soul eccentrics weren't about to take action over something so trivial. Regardless of the declaration, a tremor swept through the entirety of the state of Yuan Wu. The Fu Clan's spirit stones, marketplaces, and other holdings were divided up by several different powers. However, this had nothing to do with Han Li. Unlike what other cultivators guessed, Han Li had remained inside the state of Yuan Wu for several days after the extermination was carried out. He was currently at a small, unremarkable mountain. At the moment, he was floating in the air with his body enveloped in azure light, and was staring at the fog surrounding the mountain's center with a reminiscent expression. Over 100 years have passed, yet this place is still the same. Since the restrictions here still exist, could it be that other cultivators are living here now? Han Li muttered with a calm expression. After he had exterminated the Fu Clan cultivators with his black-tainted gold-devouring beetles, Han Li directly flew to Xin Ryan's secluded mountain, with the Fu Clan ancestors' severed head in his possession. In the past, he had made friends with Xin Ryan and Xianxia. Now that he had taken revenge on their behalf, he planned on paying his respects at their graves and bringing the matter to a conclusion. However, he didn't anticipate that Xin Ryan's former residence was being occupied by other cultivators. He couldn't help but wear a doubtful expression. After some thought, Han Li directly flew towards the mountain's restrictions. With his current cultivation and understanding of spell formations, the restrictions were incapable of stopping him. As Han Li stood in front of the fog, He calmly flicked his fingers and shot many various colored magic seals into the restriction. Soon after, the mist roiled and revealed a small passageway that Han Li immediately flew through. A short moment later, the mist disappeared, and Han Li arrived before the residence that Xin Ryan had personally built. Glancing at the deep yellow bamboo buildings, Han Li felt a trace of nostalgia as well as a feeling of sadness at times long past. At that moment, a middle-aged woman walked out from a bamboo building. Her face still contained beauty and weak spiritual qi fluctuations were emitted from her body. She was only a fourth-layer qi condensation cultivator. When Han Li saw her, he couldn't help but frown. This woman gave him a familiar impression. Who are you? How did you get in here? The middle-aged woman spotted Han Li and couldn't help but shout in surprise. Soon after, she flusteredly took out 2 fire-red talismans from her waist and looked at Han Li with a hostile expression. This was to be expected. This woman suddenly found an unfamiliar cultivator in a place that she had deemed to be completely secure. It was only natural for her to be alarmed and wary. Moreover, while this woman was unable to recognize Han Li's true cultivation with her meager power, she was able to feel that Han Li's magic power was profound beyond imagination. As such, she grew fearful. Just as Han Li stroked his chin and planned to ask for the woman's identity, she suddenly shouted in pleasant surprise after closely examining Han Li, "Yi, could it be Senior Han?" Han Li was stunned when he heard this and revealed a trace of amazement. After muttering under his breath for a moment, he faintly realized something. He wore a friendly expression as he asked, "What relationship do you have with Xiaomei? You look very similar to her." When the woman heard Han Li call out her ancestor's name, she realized she was correct and respectfully bowed. "Oh, Senior must be speaking of my ancestor. My ancestor passed away many years ago. For the time being, this junior is staying in Miss Zin's residence." Han Li wryly smiled and said, "Your servant Mei's descendant, to think that the silly little girl is now an ancestor." He then wore a puzzled expression and asked, "Still, how was it that you recognized me?" The woman blushed and embarrassingly said, "In the past, my ancestor personally drew Senior's portrait. I've looked at this portrait since I was small. That is why I was able to recognize Senior at a glance." "Oh, a portrait, I had no idea." A trace of amazement appeared on Han Li's face. He then curiously asked, "Could I take a look at it?" "Of course, Senior. How about Senior first head inside? I'll bring it to you there." The woman stepped to the side and respectfully invited Han Li in. After a moment of hesitation, Han Li walked into the bamboo building and noticed that the interior was unremarkable. But upon seeing that it was clean and well kept, Han Li nodded his head. Once Han Li took a seat, the woman hastily steeped a pot of tea. Although it couldn't be compared to the spirit tea that Xin Ryan once made, it was still pleasant and exceptional. As he began to drink the tea, the woman excused herself and went to fetch the portrait. Han Li casually swept his spiritual sense around and immediately spotted the woman. As expected, she was walking towards a pavilion. The first floor of the pavilion was completely empty, but on the second floor Han Li saw a long wooden table. The table had 2 pitch-black memorial tablets that were inscribed with the names of Xianxia and Xin Ryan. When Han Li saw this, his heart grew dim while he recalled the smiles the two wore in the past. It was a pity the two had passed so long ago. After the woman deeply saluted the memorial tablets, she took a rolled-up, foot-long scroll from the table drawer. She then hurriedly descended and ran directly towards Han Li's building. Han Li received the portrait and gently unrolled the scroll in his hand to reveal a meter-long portrait of a smiling azure-robed man. It was a lifelike image of himself. After taking a look at the scroll, Han Li sighed and rolled it back up. After a moment of thought, Han Li stared at the woman and slowly asked, "Might I ask why your ancestor left behind a portrait of me? Is there a deeper meaning behind it?" When the woman heard this, she wore a hesitant expression. With some thought, she carefully replied, "Senior Han, before Junior answers this question, may I ask whether or not you remember your promise with Miss Zin?" "Of course I remember. You also know of the matter?" Han Li asked with a trace of astonishment. With a heart filled with apprehension, the woman looked at Han Li and softly said, "In fact, Junior has continued to stay here in large part due to Senior. However, I hope you'll forgive me as I cannot speak forthrightly until your promise with Miss Zin is fulfilled." Pang! Han Li expressionlessly tossed a wooden box onto the table from his storage pouch. The woman felt her heart jump as she wasn't sure what Han Li intended. Han Li calmly said, "There is no need for fellow Taoists to be so flustered. The box contains the head of the Fu clan ancestor. The direct lineage of the Fu clan have been exterminated, and only a few distant Fu clan members remain. The Fu clan no longer holds any power in the state of Yuan Wu. Is the promise considered fulfilled? The woman cried out in shock. What? The Fu clan ancestor has already been killed. She looked at the box with gritted teeth and opened the lid, filling the air with the scent of blood. The woman's face paled, but upon recognizing the face of the head, she smiled. It truly is the Fu clan ancestor. Many years ago, I stealthily caught sight of the villain from a distance. Han Li smiled and said, because I killed him several days ago, word should have already spread. So long as you talk to someone you're familiar with or go to a market city, you should be able to verify this. Then Senior must have brought the head here too. That's right. I came to this old place to honor Miss Zin and fellow Taoist Qi. I haven't made many friends in my life, and now that I've taken revenge on their behalf, I may as well follow it to completion. Han Li's voice grew sullen, and his expression became earnest. When Miss Zin and Sir Qi learn of this in the underworld, they will certainly be pleased. Please wait for a moment, I will be right back. The woman's expression became dim, but something soon came to mind and she hurriedly left. Han Li was baffled but nodded his head and watched as the woman rushed out of the room. This time, the woman walked to a building in the back and began to dig below a tree, eventually taking a faint green jade box from within the dirt. She then carefully brought it back into the room and placed it on the table in front of Han Li. What's this? Han Li narrowed his eyes and waited for her explanation. Senior Han, before Miss Zin died from her illness, she left behind a message for my ancestor. She wished to give this box to Senior if he managed to fulfill his promise and exterminate the Fu clan. As a result, my ancestor remained here, as this would be the place Senior would make an appearance. Many years later, Senior hadn't yet returned and my ancestor passed this matter on to me. She even left behind a portrait of Senior so that we may recognize you. Now that you've personally arrived and fulfilled your promise, I will naturally act in accordance to Miss Zin's words and hand this item over to you. At long last, I am finally free of this burden. The woman spoke serenely, and her expression appeared relieved. It appeared this matter had weighed heavily on her mind. Han Li felt moved as he gazed at the box on the table. He swept his spiritual sense past it and was somewhat astonished. He grabbed onto the box and opened it without any further reservations. There was a faint azure jade slip sitting in the box with a yellow talisman attached to it, and silver lines of talisman characters faintly floated up from the box. At that moment, the woman gazed at the jade slip with a curious expression. Han Li raised his head and asked, "HM, has fellow Taoist never seen this before?" I won't conceal this from Senior, because Miss Zin hadn't left behind any words that restricted the protectors of the jade slip from looking at it. In a moment of curiosity, my ancestor thought to take a look. But after reading it for just a short moment, she spat blood and lost consciousness for an entire day. Soon after, my ancestor used a high-grade restriction talisman to restrict any of her descendants from reading it. Although I am quite curious, my cultivation is far inferior to my ancestors when she was alive. I didn't dare to touch it. Han Li nodded his head in response. He then blew a mist of azure light onto the jade slip and effortlessly removed the talisman. The woman was astonished by the sight. She had personally attempted to remove the talisman during an idle moment of curiosity, but her efforts had been completely in vain. However, Senior Han was able to remove the talisman with just a breath of spiritual qi. His cultivation must be unfathomable. Having heard that Han Li was a foundation establishment cultivator in the past, and now he had been able to exterminate the Fu clan and the Fu clan ancestor, his cultivation must be at late core formation stage at the very least. It was quite possible he was even at nascent soul stage. The woman felt awe emerge from her heart. After looking through the jade slip, Han Li put it away in a flash of azure light. Not bad. This jade slip is truly useful to me, so I will be taking it. However, fellow Taoists must have waited here for many years for me, and I feel regretful at the matter. Are you living here by yourself? Once the woman heard Han Li's question, she grew excited and eagerly said, "Of course not. My husband is also a cultivator, but his aptitude is poor, and his cultivation is similar to my own. However, my son Quanzi is young and his aptitude is not bad. However, he never had an expert's guidance and was unable to enter a cultivation sect. If Senior could, regardless of herself or her husband, so long as her son could become a disciple of this profound and mighty figure, it would be vastly beneficial." As such, she began to mutter her intentions in a roundabout manner in hopes that she wouldn't offend him. When Han Li heard this, he waved his arm and interrupted her. There is no need to continue. I understand. The woman's alarm, Han Li calmly continued. As you're a descendant of Xiao Mei and have watched over this item for so long, while I cannot take him in as a disciple, I can bestow him a foundation establishment pill and 2 bottles of medicine pills useful for qi condensation cultivation. Your son's success in foundation establishment will depend on his own luck. Once he succeeds in foundation establishment, he should have no problem entering a cultivation clan or sect. Han Li took out 3 bottles and handed them over to the woman. A foundation establishment pill. The woman rejoiced and repeatedly uttered her thanks. Her previous disappointment had completely disappeared. Then with a change of tone, Han Li asked, "Ah yes, when I exterminated the Fu clan, I killed 2 Devil Flame Sect cultivators in passing. Although I don't fear the Devil Flame Sect, I don't wish to attract any trouble. Does anybody else know of this matter?" As if aware of Han Li's worries, she hastily replied, "Senior, please be at ease. When my ancestor passed this matter on to me, no other outsiders were informed out of fear it would bring trouble to Senior. I have always been silent on this matter and mentioned this to neither my husband nor my son. Since you won't be wantonly speaking about this, I will be paying my respects to their memorial tablets before heading off." Han Li nodded with satisfaction and stood up. "Ah, if Senior is about to leave, please wait a moment. My husband and my son will soon." Peng. Just as the woman stood up, white light flashed from behind her and she lost consciousness. Han Li had flung his sleeve as if he were already prepared for this and caught the woman in a mist of azure light. At that moment, the white light behind her disappeared to reveal Silvermoon's fox body. After glancing around, Silvermoon mysteriously smiled and said, "Master, why did you have me knock this woman unconscious? Do you feel uneasy about something, or does she just catch your fancy?" Han Li appeared annoyed as he coldly snorted, "Drivel, I am neither suspicious of the woman nor do I hold malice towards her. However, it would be better for me to erase any memories of meeting me today. If any rumors were to leak, not only would it trouble me, but it would also attract calamity upon herself." With nothing else to say, his face glowed with azure light, and he pressed his fingers against the woman's head, employing the profound yin arts dreamtear technique. It would seal a few related memories and falsify them, causing this woman to believe that she managed to luckily acquire the medicine pills from a magnanimous expert. Any memories relating to Han Li would be completely sealed. This soul-altering secret technique was comparable to the soul control technique and the Warfree needle, given that they were used by someone with far greater cultivation than his own. However, this technique required that the user possess far greater cultivation than their target. Otherwise, the target would suffer great damage to their soul. As for Han Li, he had no problem using this technique on the woman as her cultivation was far too shallow. A quarter of an hour later, Han Li was finished and the woman remained asleep. After placing the woman back in her chair, Han Li took the opportunity to properly pay his respects to Qi Yunxiao and Xin Ryan. He then turned the Fu clan ancestor's head into ash and secretly left. Back in her artifact spirit form, Silvermoon curiously asked, "Master, what does the Jade slip contain? Master seems to view it with great importance." Han Li quickly flew into the sky as he leisurely said, "It is a spell formation record from the age of antiquity that describes many grand and profound formations. Even with my current attainments in spell formations, it would take me quite some time to comprehend them. In addition to spell formations, there is a truly peculiar secret art I am quite interested in." Secret art? With Master's current knowledge and the entire set of the profound yin arts, what secret arts could provoke your interest? Silvermoon softly smiled, but her voice possessed a heavy curiosity. Han Li smiled and said, "Have you ever heard of the outstanding reputation of the Three Truths Severance?" Silvermoon's laughter instantly ceased, and her voice trembled with excitement as she asked, "Could it be that it holds the greatest Taoist profound art?" "Of course not," Han Li flatly denied. "Oh, then why did Master mention this divine art? Are you deliberately teasing me? Of course the Taoist sects couldn't possibly allow this heaven-defying art to leak. They themselves don't even know if this technique is extinct," Silvermoon grumbled. Although the Jade Slip's secret technique isn't the Three Truths Severance, it is a similar type of ability from the Devil Tao. It is called the Profound Nascent Formation Arts. Han Li's originally calm expression began to reveal excitement. Silvermoon paused and said, "Profound Nascent Formation Arts, what kind of technique is that? It seems I've never heard of it before." "I've also never heard of this technique before. However, this cultivation art is a genuine secret technique for cultivating a second primal soul. Later, one may even be able to nurture a second nascent soul. Han Li's tone became solemn at the end. A second nascent soul, is this true? If that's true, it would be considered a great divine technique at the very least, even if it is inferior to the Three Truths severance. Silvermoon's spirits were greatly roused. The greater Han Li's ability, the closer she would be to her objective. Han Li's surging emotions quickly turned calm once more. I still don't know if it is true. I'll have to return to the Drifting Cloud sect and carefully examine it once through. However, the spell formations recorded in the Jade slip are genuine ancient formations. I have a few duplicates of them in a similar Jade slip, so they shouldn't be false. Master's luck is truly quite good for this technique to be directly delivered to you. However, secret devil Dao arts may be powerful, but they always tend to favor hasty benefits at great cost later on. The greater the divine ability, the more obvious this becomes. It would be better for Master to have a proper look at this technique and see if there is anything amiss. Han Li soberly agreed. I am aware, and it's natural that I will be careful. If there is anything amiss about it, then I will forego cultivating it. When Silvermoon heard him, she relaxed but soon appeared baffled as she asked, Master, it doesn't seem like you're flying in the direction of the state of Zai. You aren't planning to return to the Drifting Cloud sect. Han Li sighed and said, For the time being, I will not be returning to the state of Zai. I wish to take a visit to the state of Yue. After all, it is my birth country. I have a few secular attachments there that I must sever myself from. Otherwise, there will be worries weighing down on my mind that will interfere with my future cultivation. After a moment of silence, Silvermoon agreed, That is also good. At this stage, Master can only pursue the Supreme Tao after he severs himself from all worries of the secular world. That's enough nonsense for now. I'm going to travel as quickly as I can. Han Li ended the conversation with a cold tone. He then enveloped himself in a streak of azure light and increased his speed by several times. In an instant, he disappeared without a trace. Unknown to Han Li, in a place far away there were many green-clothed cultivators that were secretly searching through a forest. They each wore a terrified expression. At that moment, a burly man spoke to the others in a tone filled with dread. What can be done? It's already been many days and there hasn't been the slightest information on the spirit nascent. If we don't find the spirit nascent within 3 months, the sect will send enforcers for us. A stern-eyed, middle-aged scholarly man said with an icy tone. Humph. The declaration to find the spirit nascent in 3 months was merely said in a moment of anger. Everyone knows that recapturing the wood spirit nascent was no longer a matter that a foundation establishment cultivator could handle. But if we don't find even a trace of its whereabouts, I fear calamity will fall upon us all. A green-robed woman with a common appearance fearfully said, This matter wasn't even our fault. It was Marshal Uncle Ding, the guard of the spirit nascent, that sent us away and attempted to merge with the spirit nascent against orders. He even died from the backlash. Let's hurry, the spirit nascent's tracks have already vanished. Although we have a few magic tools to track and restrict it, the spirit nascent was far too quick and we were unable to chase it down. Now that the spirit nascent is isolated from restrictions, we are even more hopeless. The scholarly man snorted and said, Junior Marshal Sister should leave those words for when an enforcer comes. Fortunately, Marshal Aunt Han and Marshal Aunt Liu will come to assist us. Those 2 martial ants have wood spiritual roots. They should have some way of searching for it. However, I'm quite curious how someone could possibly control something as fierce as the wood spirit nascent without a special magic tool. It is truly inconceivable. Enough. Regardless of who restricts the spirit nascent, we must find its whereabouts in order to save our own lives. Did you not hear the voice transmission that Marshal Ancestor Quang personally sent? The burly man frowned and revealed a trace of anxiety as he said, Second Senior Marshal Brother is right. It would be considered good if we managed to preserve our lives. However, the transportation formation along the way was broken, and the 2 martial ants will need 2 days to arrive at the next transportation formation. Do you think that the cultivator who captured the spirit nascent will have left the state of Yuan Wu during this time? After all, we don't even know what country this cultivator is from. Junior Marshal Brother seems to not know. Marshal Ants Liu and Han were candidates to fuse with the spirit nascent. Many years before, they cultivated a secret technique in preparation to fuse with it, and are able to sense the direction of the spirit nascent from far away. The cultivator that restricted the spirit nascent won't be able to escape the awareness of these martial ants. The old man spoke with a sullen tone, but his words seemed to hold confidence. Once they heard the old man, The other three appeared relieved. However, the scholarly man's eyes brightly flickered in thought, and he asked, "Do you think that the person who captured the spirit nascent and the cultivator who exterminated the Fu clan are one and the same? Could chance truly have it that the spirit nascent just happened to be captured several days before the Fu clan was exterminated? Could this person have realized that we had a relationship with the Fu clan and exterminated them to prevent them from helping us?" Ninth Junior Martial Brother, you think too much. Even with such vast abilities, how could he possibly know that the spirit-controlling sect had a relationship with the Fu clan? It was most likely just a coincidence. The woman shook her head. But after some further thought, she became doubtful. However, for there to be two nascent soul cultivators to appear in the same place isn't very likely. Perhaps it truly is the same cultivator that has done this. "Oh, could you perhaps tell us about this?" A young woman's lazy voice came from the direction of a large tree. Then, in a blur of white light, two beautiful white-clothed women appeared before them. The soul control technique was used in Chapter 293, only usable against mortals. The Warfree Needle is a mortal technique that Han Li learned from Dr. Mo, used in Chapter 203 against Han Yunjai. The four green-robed cultivators were shocked upon seeing the two white-clothed women that just appeared, but quickly rushed to salute them. "Martial Aunt Han, Martial Aunt Liu." The frail woman with a pale face and wide eyes softly said, "That's enough. No need to be overly polite. Junior Martial Sister Liu and I have heard a bit of what you've said. Tell us about it and include all the details." Her voice sounded otherworldly. This woman was Han Yunjai, a woman Han Li had encountered several times in the past. Although her face was entirely the same as before, her body now appeared fragile and well-developed. Along with her beautiful body transformation, her cultivation had made great leaps as well, rising to early core formation. "Many thanks, Martial Aunt Han. Martial Nephew will obey orders." The old man in charge of the four green-clothed cultivators replied on the group's behalf. Han Yunjai nodded with a smile and stepped forward. After finding a clean spot on the ground, she took a seat. The other beauty had phoenix eyes and long eyebrows. She was a beautiful woman with a carefree expression. With a smile, she said, "Your crimes are not light. If you truly are incapable of finding the spirit nascent, I fear your master wouldn't be able to plead for your lives." Her words startled the female cultivator among the group of four. The old man bitterly laughed and wore an earnest expression. "Martial Nephew knows that his guilt is inescapable, but we were truly treated unjustly. I hope Martial Aunts will be able to speak a few words to the Martial Ancestor in our favor." The woman stretched herself while her lips glistened as she spoke. "Oh, then how about you give an explanation? The person who restricted the nascent soul is now 500 kilometers away, and we won't be able to catch up to him anytime soon. We are in no hurry for now." "Yes, when we brought the spirit nascent to the Kunmu Mountains, Martial Uncle Ding used an excuse." The old man respectfully gave a detailed explanation of the spirit nascent's escape, the spirit nascent's later capture, and the Fu clan's extermination. And Yunjai calmly listened, but her face remained completely still, as if her heart was already steeled. In contrast, the woman surnamed Liu occasionally revealed a curious expression, and her gaze flickered as if she held great interest in the old man's words. A streak of azure light flickered over the border between the state of Yuanwu and the state of Yue. According to information Han Li had acquired, the state of Yue had fallen under the rule of the Ghost Spirit Sect, and their headquarters were at the previous location of the Masked Moon Sect. As for the Tai Yue Mountains of Yellow Maple Valley, it had become the location of a side branch. After Han Li entered the state of Yue, he flew straight in the direction of the Tai Yue Mountains. Nothing has changed. As Han Li stood on a huge pile of rocks, he felt an expression of faint loneliness. In the past, he had destroyed the mountain housing his previous cave residence over fear that the Devil Dao cultivators would discover it. Now that so many years had passed, it appeared to have become a desolate area. Of course, who could have possibly thought that there was a cultivator's residence concealed underneath the rubble? After muttering to himself for a moment, Han Li raised his arm as his eyes flickered with white light. Several huge ape puppets were released that began to quickly clear away the rubble before them. The puppets cleared away the rubble by blasting a path through it with various colored beams of light, quickly clearing a way down towards the cave residence that lay beneath. With a narrow passageway formed, Han Li ordered the puppets to stand guard as he flew inside. The cave residence remained exactly the same as when he hastily left it. He couldn't make out any signs of entry, much to his relief. He didn't come here solely for nostalgia, but for the spirit well spring that was located in his hidden room. Although he already had the Jade spirit well as the highest-ranked spirit well, the spirit well tree, one always had more room for another spirit well. Although this spirit well was somewhat small, he naturally wished to bring it along with him since he was already in the state of UA. The spirit well spring was intact and emitting strands of white spiritual chi. Han Li wore a complicated expression as he looked at the spirit well and unconsciously recalled when he had just entered the Foundation establishment stage, and how he discovered the spirit well when he carved out the cave residence. He vividly remembered it as if it had happened yesterday, raising all sorts of emotions in his heart. Han Li remained in a daze for a short while before recollecting himself. He then grasped his hands in an incantation gesture and struck the spirit well with several magic seals, instantly causing it to glow brilliantly and quake the nearby ground. Han Li then sat down with an unchanged expression and formed a strange hand seal as he stared at the spirit well. Water from the spirit well began to whirl as if an invisible hand was stirring it, causing the water surface to rise and form a profoundly deep black whirlpool. An astonishing wave of spiritual chi spread throughout the room. Han Li's expression stirred. This spiritual chi was beyond what he had anticipated, but after a short moment, he recovered from his surprise and quickly began to resume the extraction. The trembling of the nearby ground became increasingly severe, and a blinding yellow light began to envelope the spirit well. This yellow light faintly deformed as the spirit well shrank and shined even more brilliantly. A short moment later, the light faded away and Han Li let out a sigh. The deep yellow, fist-sized ball floated in the air. There was now a huge, pitch-black hole beneath it where the spirit well had been. Han Li smiled upon seeing this, but his expression suddenly changed and became sullen. The puppets he had placed outside were under attack. Although they had not yet been destroyed, they were at a clear disadvantage and wouldn't last for long. Han Li instantly took out a jade box and carefully placed the yellow ball inside. He then flew out as quickly as he could. Once he arrived outside, he saw several black-clothed cultivators that had surrounded his 8 puppets about 100 meters away. A sullen, gray-clothed middle-aged man wore a puzzled expression as he observed the battle. Han Li's sudden appearance instantly shocked the cultivators at the scene, and the gray-clothed cultivator shouted for the attack to stop. The black-clothed cultivators hastily ceased their actions and withdrew to the man's side. An azure light arrived in midair and faded away to reveal Han Li. He expressionlessly gazed at the several cultivators in silence and revealed his nascent soul cultivation in an imposing manner. The gray-clothed man glanced at Han Li and felt his heart drop. His shock was soon replaced by a smile. "Senior, please do not misunderstand. Us juniors hold no malice. We merely felt that the spiritual chi here became abnormal and we curiously thought to take a look. I'm the ghost spirit Sex Yu Hun, disciple of Master Splintered Soul. We do not hold any bad intentions." Master Splintered Soul. Han Li frowned and felt as if this name sounded familiar. After a moment of thought, Han Li suddenly recalled something. Wasn't this the name of one of the ghost spirit sect nascent soul eccentrics? He recalled that the Drifting Cloud sect's silver-haired old man had mentioned that this person was ruthless and wasn't to be trifled with. As Han Li's mind wandered, the gray-clothed old man noticed that Han Li reacted to his master's name and he grew far more at ease. However, he was still apprehensive and forced a smile. "Senior recognizes my master. Could he be an acquaintance of him? I must have acted far too rashly. I had no idea that Senior was handling business here, else I wouldn't have dared to bother you. If there is anything that I may do to assist you, I will do my utmost to obey. Otherwise, I would like to ask for myself to be excused so that I may get out of your way." Although the gray-clothed man had an intimidating appearance, he was rather cunning and sly. After asking a few probing questions, he acted extremely deferential. In the end, the appearance of an unknown nascent soul cultivator had caused his back to run with cold sweat. Han Li expressionlessly stared at the gray-clothed man and didn't respond. Instead, he released his spiritual sense within the scope of 100 meters and found that there were no other cultivators. It seems that this party had truly discovered the nearby disturbance by chance, and they had come alone. If that was the case, Han Li suddenly felt an urge to kill. Regardless of his previous identity as a Yellow Maple Valley cultivator, he was now a Drifting Cloud sect elder. He couldn't possibly release these Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators from his grasp. In addition, the young master of the Ghost Spirit Sect had once nearly taken his life, and the stifled grudge was still buried within his heart. There was also the fact that he had entered the state of UA in secret. If his entrance to the state of UA reached the ears of the ghost spirit sex eccentrics, he would attract their attention, producing nothing but trouble. He didn't wish for several nascent soul cultivators to chase him throughout the state of UA. This person is. Just as Han Li prepared his silent attack, an old man amongst the party of black-clothed cultivators suddenly cried out in shock at the sight of Han Li. Last seen at the end of the Trial of Blood and Fire in Chapter 203, when Han Li removed her memories. They previously met when Han Li acquired the Golden Sincerity brush from her. Note, their surnames are homonyms. Han Li's surname is Chinese letter while Han Yunjai's surname is Chinese letter. A strange glint appeared in Han Li's eyes. He glanced at the old man and indifferently asked, "What? You recognize me?" The old man shivered underneath Han Li's icy gaze and hastily answered, "No, I am mistaken. How could Junior have possibly recognized you?" "You've admitted to be mistaken." Han Li indifferently rubbed his chin and swept his gaze past the others as if he believed the old man. The gray-clothed man seemed puzzled as he glanced at the old man. Although he felt it was odd, he couldn't afford to pursue the matter. He could only think of flattering Han Li and somehow taking an opportunity to flee. Before any of them could respond, Han Li slowly said, "Since you are ghost spirit sect cultivators and have discovered my trail, you're just out of luck. I will be taking your lives." As soon as that was said, Han Li's expression grew dark and he waved his sleeve, releasing over 10 streaks of azure swordlight. As soon as these swordlights left his sleeve, they transformed into over 40 swordlights in a blur and engulfed the black-clothed cultivators in an overwhelming strike. When the gray-robed cultivator heard Han Li's voice grow harsh, he knew that matters had taken a turn for the worst. His complexion grew pale upon seeing Han Li's momentous attack. Of course, he wasn't about to submit to death. He instinctively whirled his body, releasing countless stands of black chi to cover his body. A gold and a silver prong soon flew out from the mist and transformed into a gold and a silver python to guard the front of the black chi. The gray-clothed cultivator then did his utmost to fly backwards in a streak of black smoke, abandoning the rest of the black-clothed cultivators to their fates. Apart from the old man, the rest of the ghost spirit sect cultivators were helplessly beheaded by the assault of azure sword streaks. As the old man was paralyzed from fright, Han Li flicked his finger, launching a slim azure strand from the sword streaks. It instantly bore into the old man's body and caused him to collapse on the ground. When Han Li saw this, he no longer paid any attention to the old man and focused on the gray-clothed cultivator that had fled over 300 meters away. Han Li sneered and casually pointed at the swordlights and had over 100 streaks of swordlight converge together, instantly forming a huge azure sword. "Go," Han Li softly uttered. The huge sword trembled and released a muffled hum before launching itself forward at an unfathomable speed. In the blink of an eye, a dazzling explosion of azure light erupted from the black smoke. The strike from the huge sword annihilated the black chi and the pythons at the same time. With a wretched scream, the gray-clothed cultivator was rent into a mist of gore. Han Li recalled the magic treasure, and his expression grew sullen as he glanced at the old man lying unconscious on the ground. After some further thought, Han Li raised his hand and drew the old man's shriveled body into his grasp. Azure light flickering from his free hand, he pressed it against the old man's head without any reservations. After the time it took to finish a cup of tea, fire flared from his hand and turned the old man into ash. Han Li floated in the air with his arms held behind his back and wore a flabbergasted expression on his face. That disciple left behind to the harmonious bond sect, Dong Chuaner, actually formed a core. However, it is truly odd that she would send men after me. The old man's origins were quite complicated. He was once a disciple of the harmonious bond sect, but because he had greatly violated the sect's laws and feared that his soul would be refined, he changed his appearance and identity. He had remained hidden inside the ghost spirit sect ever since. Naturally, Han Li didn't care for such matters. What shocked him was how the old man, along with many other harmonious bond sect disciples, were sent to frantically search for Han Li by the core formation stage Dong Chuaner. These people were even sent into the Nine Nations Alliance in order to search for traces of Han Li. It seemed the old man had shockingly recognized Han Li due to having seen his portrait before. At the time, Han Li had been in the scattered star seas, and the matter was ultimately left unresolved. As of current, Han Li felt greatly confused. He wasn't so vain as to think that Dong Chuaner fancied him. As such, he felt that there was a deeper reason for her continuous search for him. It was only a pity that the old man's status at the time wasn't high and he had no further information on the matter. After pondering for a moment, Han Li couldn't think of a reason why Dong Xuaner would send men to search for him, and he shook his head, placing the matter at the back of his mind. Now that so many years had passed, this matter didn't affect him in the slightest. There was even less cause for concern since he was now a nascent soul cultivator. With that thought, Han Li dealt with the Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators' corpses and glanced in the direction of the former location of Yellow Maple Valley before departing from the Tai Yue mountain range. Unbeknownst to Han Li, at the same moment he killed the gray-clothed cultivator, a black-robed, shriveled-skinned cultivator awoke from his meditation with a frown and sighed. He then took out a dull, pitch-black bone medallion from his robes. The black-robed cultivator fiddled with the bone medallion and glanced at it with narrowed eyes. A stern expression appeared from his face. A moment later, he stood up and walked out of the secluded room. After walking down a long corridor, the black-robed cultivator arrived in a large hall, and he calmly took a seat in a stone chair. With a white flickering light emitting from his hands, he took out a small bronze bell. A loud clang rang out with a casual swing of the bell. A deep ring continued to reverberate from it, spreading over an unknown distance. The black-robed man put away the small bell and remained still inside his chair. A short moment later, 3 core formation cultivators hurriedly entered the hall from 3 side doors, 2 men and 1 woman. They deferentially stood in front of the old man with their heads face down with solemn expressions. Just now, the light from your 6th junior martial brother's life medallion was extinguished. It seems he met a vicious end. Although I don't know what exactly happened, he was a disciple of me, splintered soul. I cannot allow his death to remain unanswered. Find the killer and bring him to me alive. I wish for them to give me the story behind what happened. The black-clothed cultivator indifferently spoke as if he were discussing a trivial matter. The 3 cultivators were initially surprised, but they soon saluted him with bowed heads. As you bid, master. We will immediately depart. I hope the next time I see you, you will have already placed the killer in the immortals' hold. The black-robed cultivator nodded his head and left the hall without another word. Only the 3 core formation cultivators, the disciples of Splintered Soul, remained in the hall. After a moment of consideration, the cultivator with a bold and clear appearance orderly arranged, 5th Junior Martial Sister, send a voice transmission talisman to the sect branch in the Tai Yue Mountains as soon as you can. Let's see whether or not they know about 6th Junior Martial Brother meeting with mishap. If they are unaware, have them send men to investigate the whereabouts of the killer. Junior Martial Brother Que, your relationship with the side branch master is quite good. See whether or not he can send men to investigate if any unfamiliar high-grade cultivators have recently entered the state of Yue. Also, we will all send our own competent disciples to investigate the last known location of 6th Junior Martial Brother and see whether or not there are any clues. Once this information is relayed back, we will set forth together to capture this person. Since he was able to kill 6th Junior Martial Brother, his cultivation should be high. It is best to be careful. The other 2 cultivators were a middle-aged woman who still possessed beauty, and an eerie scholarly man wearing embroidered robes. The woman smiled upon hearing him, but the scholarly man frowned and revealed a somewhat unsightly expression. A moment later, he reluctantly nodded. As if feeling worried, bold-faced cultivator stared at the embroidered-robed scholarly man and coldly said, Junior Martial Brother Que, I know that you were on bad terms with 6th Junior Martial Brother. However, this matter was personally given by the master. You should know what will happen if you disobey. Don't forget that 2nd Senior Martial Brother and 7th Junior Martial Brother were also punished for mishandling their affairs. The scholarly man wryly smiled and chuckled. That isn't the case. Although we didn't get along, he is dead now, and this matter is now assigned to me by the master. Please be at ease, 3rd Senior Martial Brother. I will definitely try my hardest. The bold-faced cultivator slowly said, If Junior Martial Brother knows how things stand, then let us set off. The 3 then left the hall to attend to their own matters. Several days later, the Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators had tracked down where Han Li killed the party of cultivators. After further inspection, Han Li's original cave residence was also discovered. When the 3 disciples of Splintered Soul heard this, they rushed to the Tai Yue Mountains with a group of disciples in tow. After entering, they looked at each other in dismay as they stood in front of the large hole where the spirit well used to be. At that same moment in a land far away, Han Yunjai and that woman surnamed Liu were hurriedly crossing through a series of towering mountains into the state of Yue. Dong Xuaner was a woman first introduced in chapter 224. She was an unruly flirt who seduced many men, resulting in her ancestor pairing her up with Han Li. She was later abducted by the Harmonious Bond sect. The Jing province was located in the northwest of the state of Yue. Because it was a remote region, there were few cities but many small villages, and many small mountains and hills within the province's borders, as well as many desolate areas few ever came across. As a result, the Jing province was also home to far more bandits than other provinces, and was also where Jianghu martial artists lingered the most. While there had never been a great Jianghu faction that managed to unite the region, this area had produced many formidable characters. Bodyguards and caravan escorts rose in opposition to the many bandits. One day, on the side of a desolate dirt road, a rather common scene in the Jing province was taking place. There were over 100 brawny men wearing rough clothes, each with black scarves covering their heads, surrounding 30 azure-clothed men with various weapons. The azure-clothed men were in turn protecting the several carriages at their center. It was a scene of a group of bandits fighting a group of caravan escorts. There were 3 black-clothed men with similar appearances standing at the bandits' rear. They coldly glanced at the scene with malice occasionally showing on their faces. Near the carriages there were several men, young and old, wearing similar servant garbs. They each had a club in hand and wore nervous expressions. Inside the 4 carriages, there were many women and children wearing magnificent clothes, but the carriage at the very front had a calm middle-aged man wearing scholar's robes. With his long and glossy beard and mustache, he appeared to lack the strength to knock over even a chicken, but he possessed an indescribable air of authority. None that saw him dared to underestimate him. The middle-aged scholar was sitting across from a man with blue embroidered robes and a thick, pointed mustache and beard. His arms were thick and he possessed a spirited gaze. He was a rarely seen peak Jianghu expert. These obviously unordinary characters both wore calm expressions and were the only ones inside the large carriage. Although the 2 were silent, they were examining everything outside from the half-shut curtains and occasionally heard bloody wails and clangs from the outside. While the black scarf bandits were great in number, the azure-clothed caravan guards and the servants were greater in skill. For a time, both sides found themselves in a deadlock. The scholarly man smiled upon seeing this and spoke to the large man. It seems there is no need to trouble Brother Li to take action. The martial sky escort should be able to handle it. Haha, if those 3 leaders of the black scarf bandits don't take any action, it is only natural for the martial sky escort to be able to deal with these small fry. But if the 3 black scarf leaders were to attack, they wouldn't last. After all, the 3 leaders are renowned for their fierceness in the Jing province. I heard they are brothers by blood and are experts in united techniques. Ordinary experts are no match for them. After the large man said this, his face faintly revealed a trace of excitement. He bent his stretched finger, producing loud cracks from his hand. It was clear the man was highly skilled in external martial arts. When the scholarly man saw this, he unconsciously laughed. Brother Li, your eagerness to fight is exactly the same as your father. The large man responded with a helpless smile. Little brother Han, that is to be expected. Our Li clan is one of martial heritage. If we come across an interesting opponent, it is only natural to wish to measure their might. It is just like how your Han clan has always been one of great literary repute, and how there is always 1 or 2 from your clan that manages to enter the imperial court as an official. The large man then crossed his hands and said, Still, I'm quite puzzled as to how our Han and Li clans have managed to form such bonds despite having so little in common. This friendship has lasted deeply for many generations and has yet to fade with time. The scholarly man smiled and said, Haha, in the past few days I flipped through a few letters and unintentionally discovered a few events from the past. If Brother Li wishes to know about them, I can tell you about them, but I don't know how much of it is true. When the large man surnamed Li heard this, he said with a curious expression, Really? Our Li clan has no custom of recording our ancestry. Apart from leaving behind a few martial teachings, there is little else left behind, let alone the history behind our clan's friendship. The large man gazed into the distance and his expression changed. Not good, those 3 leaders have decided to attack. We'll have to put this off for now. Tell me about it after I take care of those 3. He then shot out of the carriage as if he were being launched from a crossbow. Soon after, the large man's howls of laughter could be heard, followed by mournful screams. The scholarly man sighed and shook his head before closing the curtain. He didn't feel the need to look outside as he held complete confidence in the large man. After the time it took to finish a cup of tea, the sounds outside came to a sudden halt. The carriage's curtain fluttered for a moment, and the large man reappeared in the carriage with a blur. He appeared a bit worse for wear. His shoulder was bloodied as if he were slightly wounded, but nonetheless he heartily laughed to the scholarly man and said, "Those three were truly skilled. They had to make me do quite a bit, but having witnessed my might, the Black Scarf bandits have disappeared from the Jing province." The large man appeared to have enjoyed himself. When the scholarly man heard this, he wore an apologetic expression. "If I hadn't brought Brother Li along, I fear I would have passed on to the other side, with this route being my place of death. Due to the great hatred those enemies hold for me, I was forced to involve Brother Li." The large man surnamed Li casually said, "What do you mean involve?" The Li clan steadily established themselves at the top of Jianghu only because of the Han clan's great assistance. Helping each other is by no means an external affair. "That is true, but I was merely being contrary." The scholarly man's smile was replaced with an expression of calm. It seemed he was one of flexible mind. As the large man smeared a bottle of ointment on his back, he suddenly recalled the matter before the battle. "However, Brother Han, don't forget to tell me about our clan's past. I'm quite curious about this." "Of course, when mentioning it, our clan's friendship is quite unfathomable. Do you recall the Seven Mysteries Sect, the hegemon of the Jing province many decades ago? Our ancestors were martial brothers inside this Jianghu faction. According to what was said in the letter, my great-uncle was sworn brothers with your ancestor. Our clan's friendship stemmed from their own friendship. It was also said, my great-uncle was quite the formidable character. It was said." As the middle-aged scholar calmly spoke, the azure-clothed men buried the corpses from both sides and had the carriages move once more. The carriages soon grew distant and disappeared from the desolate road. Green Ox Village. Han Li floated a kilometer in the air with his body covered in azure light. He looked down at the village below with a trace of doubt. Although this village was once pathetically small, only spanning a few kilometers in area, he was no longer able to draw any similarities to the streets that he remembered, but he did manage to remember its surroundings. It did seem to truly be his home village. In his many years of absence, the village had turned into a bustling town. After staring at it from the sky, he hesitated for a moment before descending into a desolate alleyway under the guise of a concealment technique. Afterwards, he walked out of the alleyway with a swagger and slowly headed down the street. Seeing the unfamiliar houses and buildings as he walked down the street, Han Li muttered to himself, "It is quite different." For some unknown reason, he knew that if he were to head west, he'd be able to see the forest and verdant mountain where he had spent his childhood. However, his steps grew hesitant and slow as he took in the vast changes that had occurred to Green Ox Village. At that moment, Han Li's expression was calm, but he hoped that he would soon find something familiar. However, Han Li was only disappointed until he arrived at a three-way intersection. He stopped and stared at a small shabby restaurant at the side of the road. The restaurant was worn and only 2 stories high with a yellowish signboard that had the words Spring Fragrance. It was the restaurant that Han Li's third uncle, Fatty Han, had once managed. Han Li glanced at the restaurant and faintly remembered walking through its sliding doors. There was the round face of his third uncle, the narrow courtyard behind the restaurant, the dimly lit side room and the tasty food, the black carriage with the banner Seven Mysteries Sect, and many more memories began to clearly appear in Han Li's mind. Han Li glanced at the restaurant with a complicated expression. A trace of sadness was betrayed within his eyes. He stared at the restaurant for a moment before discovering that a few strangers on the road were glancing at him with an odd expression. It came as no surprise. A youth was motionlessly staring at an old shabby restaurant after all. With a moment more of thought, he calmly walked into the restaurant with his hands held behind his back.